There were always problems for everyone, but most of them always started with big money. Seo Yujin was just an ordinary girl, but with an unusual fate. If it weren't for that cursed debt, she would have simply remained poor and ordinary. None of this would have ever happened to her. And she would have never crossed paths with such a dangerous beast. But if it was written in her fate, there was no way to escape it. All she could do was accept things as they were. When Seo Yujin met him, she didn't fully understand the situation at first. But deep down, she knew she could handle it, even if sometimes she was scared. Whispers spread across the office. Mr. Jin Tayo was coming back home. As always, the sharp sound of the CEO's expensive heels echoed through the hall as she rushed to her office, greeting employees along the way. Whenever employees saw the CEO, they'd straighten up and greet her politely, making sure she noticed them at their desks. Yujin overheard the news about CEO's younger brother return, and it made her uneasy. Once the CEO's office door closed, everyone finally breathed easier. Some employees started asking who Jin Tayo was and why the CEO seemed so furious. Rumor had it that the CEO's younger brother was coming home, and that's why she was so angry. People said every family had that one difficult child. Some even whispered they might not be real siblings. Jin Seoryong was the CEO of the company, but describing Jin Tayo with just the word complicated was an understatement. While Seoryong was away, Executive Director Yoon wanted to meet her. The CEO wondered what he wanted. Maybe he had problems of his own, but she was already furious and distracted by her brother's return. And honestly, that return was a big problem. After all, he didn't exactly run away from home, lose his mind over women, or become some kind of social outcast. On the surface, he seemed normal, just as expected. But the truth was, Jin Tayo was a cruel bastard. Even though he hid behind many masks, his true nature always slipped through, and it wasn't a kind one. She remembered him as a quiet, normal child. Even when other kids teased him, he didn't seem to care. Tayo was 10 years old when he finally realized something was wrong. That's when everything began to change. A group of bullies approached him after school. He looked like a kid from a rich family, easy prey. The boy panicked and bit the one who scared him the most, desperately trying to protect himself. That single bite was the first step toward the person he would become. Tayo bit so hard the skin tore, and that moment became his trigger, the beginning of serious psychological problems. Violence often starts this way. Maybe it's a survival instinct. But after that day, no one could stop him. One day, his father left Tayo outside the house as punishment, refusing to let him in until he admitted what he'd done wrong. It was one of the coldest days ever recorded. In the end, a battle of pride ended with Tayo collapsing after 5 hours and 17 minutes. If they had been even a little later, he might have lost his arms and legs to frostbite. One autumn day, before graduating college, Tayo decided to enlist in the army. Leaving only a few words behind, he volunteered to become an officer. The whole family was shocked, but their reaction wasn't the right one. He joined the military without asking anyone's opinion. And honestly, his family tried to fix him afterward, but the truth is, he was just born a monster. 3 years later, Tayo returned to Korea after serving in a conflict zone most people never even got close to. Seoryong was sure that Director Yoon couldn't just leave without a scandal, and asked who made sure he left quietly. Manager Kim replied that Secretary Seo Yujin had brought him coffee, and shortly after that, he left. The CEO knew very well that secretaries had ways to handle things like this. Jin Seoryong asked Secretary Yujin to come to her office. Meanwhile, she wondered if maybe it was worth keeping an eye on him. We're talking about 50 million. Nobody could quite believe it. It was a huge amount. Of course, it was just the first investment, not a salary. And what about 10 million won a month? Was that really too little? Her younger brother was supposed to finish his military service in 5 years, but only 3 years had passed, and now he was coming back. The CEO thought he might need some help. It seemed simple enough: follow his schedule and escort him when needed. Most importantly, she'd need daily reports, 3 months max. The CEO planned to transfer her to the planning department afterward, a job Yujin had always dreamed of. But Seo Yujin didn't understand. If this was so simple, why her? The CEO wanted her to keep an eye on her brother, to make sure he didn't cause trouble. She believed Yujin could handle it perfectly. Yujin was stunned. What could she possibly do about the CEO's brother's problems? If something happened, she wasn't supposed to fix it. Just keep him away from the press. If he appeared on social media, the company's stock would plummet, and the family would become the center of every scandal. Jin Seoryung didn't see it as too much to ask. Seo Yujin really shouldn't have been that surprised. The conditions were unusual. What kind of man needed this much supervision? Yujin thought there had to be people way more qualified for a job like this. The CEO tried to explain delicately. She knew her brother wasn't the type to beat women or children, at least not yet. Maybe this was how they'd come to this day, that money. It felt more like shame than payment. She had to meet him, but Yujin didn't even know what he looked like. The CEO assured her she'd recognize him instantly. You'll know him when you see him. But the girl wasn't so sure she trusted such a vague statement. Things could go wrong. She tried to find the manager's number, but it wasn't working. The noise around her made it hard to focus. Because of her father's debt, she'd never had a full-time job, but she'd gained one useful skill that always helped her. Her biggest weapon was simple. She always told the truth. Even when people didn't like her for it, she believed it was the right thing to do. The moment of truth had finally come, and her instincts were screaming louder than ever. A cold wave of fear washed over her. She didn't have to wait long. The first thing that caught her eye was a guy. Handsome, but with a heavy, almost suffocating aura around him. He walked right up to her and called her by name. She instantly knew she shouldn't get involved with this man standing before her. But she forced a smile and replied that yes, he wasn't mistaken. It really was her. She greeted him politely, already knowing from the start that his name was Jin Tae-yo, and said it was nice to meet him. The secretary added that the car was waiting in the parking lot and offered to show him the way. But Tae-yo wasn't even listening. He brushed past her, clearly intending to leave. Seo Yujin tried to stop him, asking him to follow her. Inwardly, she was sure of one thing, that this man was strange. There was something dangerous about him. She asked if he'd chosen a place to stay, wondering where they should head. Tae-yo muttered something about going to the Central Hotel. She got the message. The rest of the ride was silent. She had no idea what to talk about with him. Tae-yo was the one to break the silence, asking if she'd been sent by his sister, the one who always had to keep everything under control. Yujin didn't even know what to say. She wasn't sure if she should answer at all. Jin Seoryung hadn't given her any clear instructions. All the CEO had said was that her younger brother was coming home after a long absence and felt uncomfortable, especially after serving in the military for so long. He probably assumed she was just some assistant assigned to take care of all his errands. But then he shot her a suspicious look and asked if she'd heard that he doesn't hit women or kids. It was so until 3 years ago. Encounters with women hiding guns under their skirts and children carrying bombs in fruit baskets had changed the way he saw the world. Nothing in this world came for free, but Yujin had been blinded by money. Tae-yo asked for her opinion, giving her that same unsettling look again. It felt terrifying, like her life was in his hands and he was deciding what to do with it. The look in his eyes was that of a wild predator deciding whether to kill or not. And so the next 3 months would reveal everything, whether this beast could be tamed or whether she could survive beside him. Seo Yujin and Tae-yo had already arrived at the Central Hotel, the place he'd chosen to stay. As they entered the main lobby, they saw a man rushing forward to greet Jin Tae-yo with obvious joy. Even though it had been years since they'd last seen each other, the man recognized him instantly, but still asked to make sure. Was it really him, the young master who'd served in the military? Kim Il-deok, the hotel's manager, came closer, asking when Tae-yo had returned and complaining that no one had told him. He would have given him a proper welcome. Tae-yo was just as surprised that manager Kim was still working at the hotel after all this time. Yujin was quietly amazed by their easy conversation. The manager smiled, admitting he'd already reached retirement age last year, but he was genuinely happy to still be working. Even my mother wouldn't forgive me if I pretended not to recognize you because of old age, the manager joked lightly. Then he asked how long Tae-yo planned to stay this time, unaware that he had already been discharged from the military. When he found out, the manager was genuinely happy to hear that Tae-yo was finally returning to normal civilian life. The guy asked manager Kim to prepare a room for him, saying he'd be staying there for a while. The manager promised to arrange everything and offered him his usual suite. While Yujin watched their conversation, trying to keep up with what was happening, something unexpected suddenly caught her attention again. A loud, arrogant man was making a huge scene at the front desk because the receptionist didn't know who he was and, in his opinion, wasn't treating him properly. He shouted that he'd invested a fortune into this hotel and demanded to know how she dared speak to him like that. He didn't want to hear any excuses, just yelled for the manager to be called immediately. The manager quickly appeared at the reception desk, clearly intent on diffusing the situation fast. Yujin wasn't even surprised. The world was full of liars. She silently wished the manager good luck. The manager politely asked the man how he could help. The man snapped back with loaded questions. Was he really the manager? Did he even know who he was talking to? Then barked an order to prepare the most expensive suite on the top floor. Kim Il-deok apologized politely, but explained that the suite was already booked. He offered him a luxury room on the first floor instead. The man thought the manager was either mocking him or too old to hear properly. He repeated again that he wanted the top floor and the best room. To Yujin, it all looked like a one-man circus. But deep down, she felt like she'd seen this face somewhere before. The manager remained calm and patient. He said they'd arrange another excellent room for him and offer their best wine as an apology. The man got even angrier, grabbed the manager by the collar, and shouted that he wasn't some beggar who needed free wine. All he wanted was the top floor suite. Yujin could hardly listen to this nonsense any longer, but she didn't know how to stop it. And watching Tayo, she could tell he was about to snap. When she finally raised her voice, the man froze, but didn't even bother to look at her. His gaze was like that of a wild beast who'd smelled blood and wasn't about to back down from the hunt. But Yujin remembered the CEO's warning clearly. Her brother must never end up in the press. She realized the situation was critical, too dangerous, but she had to do her job. Keep Tayo out of trouble. She needed to stop this. Why are you ignoring me? Can't you even do your job? The man snapped, still furious. Then he noticed someone challenging him from the sidelines and got even more irritated. His eyes landed on Tayo, who stood calm but stared at him with a deadly serious look. The man couldn't back down now. If he did, he'd look like a fool. He had to get what he wanted from the manager. Yujin quietly took out her phone, hit record, and gave the man a polite smile. She asked sweetly if she could ask him a few questions. Tayo was surprised by her move, but didn't stop her. He was curious to see how this would play out. The man, already furious, snapped, "Who the hell are you?" Yujin didn't flinch and calmly asked, "Aren't you Director Lee Jung-jin from Hank Corporation?" The man confirmed her guess. Yes, he was the director, but had no idea what she wanted from him. The girl calmly warned him she was recording their conversation, then introduced herself as reporter Kim Ji-young from the Everyday News. What a lucky coincidence to meet him at this very hotel. Not too long ago, the second generation of conglomerates had been on trial after a drug scandal. The article about it had been weak, but who would have thought that today she'd get the chance to interview him in person? The man grew noticeably nervous and angry, demanding that she move the phone away from him. But she told him to just ignore it. They could keep talking as if the phone wasn't even there. Just think about it. He was still on probation. Yujin continued her conversation with the unpredictable man. The woman standing nearby couldn't take it anymore. She'd had enough and walked away. The man decided to follow her, still yelling that everyone had made a huge mistake today. He'd spent a fortune on this hotel and hoped the devil would take them all. The manager and the receptionist finally let out a breath of relief. Yujin couldn't believe she'd actually managed to calm that crazy man down. At last, she could exhale. She'd been worried her plan was too simple and never expected it to work so fast. Tayo shot her a sharp look and told her never to interfere in situations like that without his permission. He hated when anyone got in his way. Yujin didn't care. She was going to do it anyway. It was her job and she was paid well for it. He didn't care what kind of job she had, but warned her not to annoy him again. Otherwise, there would be serious consequences. She already guessed what those consequences could be. But even so, she couldn't allow herself to neglect her duties. The manager apologized for interrupting their conversation, but politely offered to escort them upstairs. Tayo didn't say a word. He just turned around and followed the manager. Yujin stood there, unsure what to do next. Her heart was pounding like crazy. She'd never been this exhausted in her life. It was already late at night when Yujin finally got home. All she wanted was to rest. Without even changing, she collapsed face first onto her bed and didn't move an inch. She couldn't understand why this day felt so long. Tayo was already getting on her nerves to the point where she wanted to punch him, but one thought kept her calm. Her bed was so soft, and she'd missed it all day. But the same old problem was still there: money. It was hard, but she had to push through for her own future. Just 3 months of babysitting the son of a third-generation chaebol, and she'd earn 100 million won. It wasn't an easy job, but how could she turn down such an offer? 3 months wasn't that long. She just needed to prepare herself to ignore her client's unpredictable behavior. Seo Yujin was born into a loving family, but they were never well off. She'd always dreamed of having enough money to buy anything she wanted. No matter how much she worked, her father's debt was massive, and everything she earned went toward paying it off. Her mother spent days and nights washing dishes at restaurants, but the pay was so small they barely got by. Yujin had to juggle school and part-time jobs with no time to rest. They'd gone through a lot together, but the debt never got smaller. 3 months of this job would let her pay off 10% of her father's debt. She couldn't afford to lose this opportunity. Earning that much money, honestly, was impossible. When the CEO offered Yujin this job, she accepted without a second thought, even knowing how difficult it would be for her. She didn't even realize how fast she fell asleep. It felt like she'd just closed her eyes, and it was already time to go to work again. Greeting everyone with a warm good morning, Secretary Seo started her new workday. Jin Seoryung asked how her brother Tae-oh behaved the night before, but Yujin said nothing special happened. The CEO then asked if she planned to check Tae-oh's room to make sure everything was okay, but there were already rumors that last night he'd caused trouble in the hotel lobby. Seoryung was probably talking about the argument that broke out when Yujin stepped in to help the manager get rid of an unruly guest. Yujin stood in front of the door, breathing heavily. She had never been this nervous before. Her entire paycheck depended on this guy. 3 months, she thought bitterly, still waiting for Tae-oh to open the door. What a great joke. And this was just her first day on the job. Tae-oh had made a scene in the hotel lobby last night. He probably went down to drink to adjust to the time difference. She assumed he'd gotten into a fight with a drunk guest. The man had started it, there were plenty of witnesses, and they'd managed to cover everything up. 12 weeks until the end of this assignment. But why wasn't he opening the door? She didn't get it. Anyway, Tae-oh's suite had plenty of rooms. The CEO's words kept echoing in her head. If she agreed to monitor him 24/7, she'd get an extra 10 million won each month. Yujin had always learned to adapt and obey her superiors. She knew exactly whose pocket her salary came from. She had to do whatever it took this time too, but she also needed to let off steam. She felt like screaming for Tae-oh to open the damn door already. He'd been doing whatever he wanted while she wasn't around. Now she had to keep an eye on him 24/7. She shouted through the door, telling him to stop pretending he wasn't inside. She didn't even notice the hotel staff member approaching her, who informed her that the guest from this room had gone to the gym and was now in the cafe on the second floor. That explained why no one answered. The staff member asked her to keep quiet so as not to disturb other guests. Yujin hurried to the cafe, where Tae-oh was supposed to be after his workout. She spotted him sitting by the window, sipping his coffee. Across from him sat manager Kim, who told Tae-oh he'd prepared everything he'd asked for and to let him know if he needed anything else. When the manager saw Yujin, he said he had to go. On his way out, he greeted her, and she smiled back. Yujin walked up to Tae-oh's table and sat down across from him. She wished him a good morning and said she was glad to see him safe and sound. Did he really enjoy making people chase him around while he calmly sipped his coffee alone? Yujin finally asked him to at least inform her if he planned to go somewhere. She'd been waiting outside his room for ages. Tae-oh didn't think he owed her any explanations. If she was supposed to watch him, then she'd better be by his side all the time. In his eyes, they weren't close enough for him to share his plans with her. Even though the girl was furious, she tried to smile and keep the conversation going. She mentioned that she'd heard he had a little incident last night. Tae-oh didn't consider it an incident, just a minor misunderstanding. And he had no intention of talking about it, especially not with Yujin. Because of what happened, she'd now have to stay by his side 24/7. That was Jin Seoryung's order, and she was sure he wouldn't argue with that. Thanks to him, Yujin was staying overnight in a hotel room for the very first time. But Tae-oh wanted to remind her of something. Whether she remembered what he told her last night. Tae-oh couldn't stand anyone meddling in his business, and if she still wanted to be around him 24/7, she'd have to stay invisible. Tae-oh knew very well that Yujin desperately needed the money, so she'd better do her job without bothering anyone. Yujin tried to explain that if it weren't for the money, she wouldn't be here at all. But for her, it wasn't easy to live without causing trouble. That whole incident happened when she wasn't around. She didn't like it either, and he should keep that in mind. She couldn't imagine who in their right mind would willingly clean up someone else's mess. The CEO Jin kept saying it wasn't mandatory, but she knew very well that Yoojin wouldn't refuse that kind of money. How could an ordinary office employee like her not obey an order from the company's CEO? She wasn't thrilled about the situation either, and Tayo needed to understand that. The man was surprised to hear she was getting paid for this. He hadn't expected his sister to go that far, spending so much out of her own pocket. Yoojin couldn't understand why he thought she'd just follow him around for free, without any reward. Her services were paid for, at least as long as she didn't mess up. But with his behavior, that could happen any minute, and then she'd be in big trouble. Despite everything, she was starting to think the amount the CEO offered her was way too small. It wouldn't hurt to ask for hazard pay on top of it. Tayo suddenly wanted Yoojin to prove to him why he even needed her services, and why he couldn't do without her. She was genuinely stunned. His demand was ridiculous, and she wasn't planning to prove anything to him. He wanted her to give him a reason why he should keep her around, waiting for her to prove her usefulness. Even though Yoojin knew this was nonsense, she still had to agree. Tayo made it clear he wasn't generous enough to keep useless people close to him. She had expected this, but still couldn't wrap her head around why her life had to be this hard and complicated. When she entered Tayo's room, she was shocked. It was huge and stunning. She couldn't help but ask how much he paid per night for such a luxurious room. He didn't understand why she cared. She'd never be able to afford a suite like his anyway. Yoojin figured she might as well say something nice. Surprisingly, in black, he looked like a Grim Reaper. Tayo didn't get her compliment or why she made that comparison. Yoojin hurried to explain that she hadn't meant anything bad. He suggested she just blame it on nerves and forget what she'd said. Then he tried to leave again, making her wonder where he was going. He said he wanted to visit one square shopping mall. After being away for so long, that's where he wanted to go first. Tayo and malls didn't really match, but since it was a work day, the parking lot was nearly empty. He didn't want to explain anything in detail, just said he needed to get to the 4th floor. But there were plenty of spots on the 2nd floor too. If he kept making things this complicated, life in Korea would be pretty hard for him. Tayo didn't like repeating himself. He added that it had to be Zone C, and told her to confirm whether she understood or needed him to repeat it. Yoojin did exactly as Tayo told her. At first, everything seemed fine. Not even a hint of him being annoyed. But he walked so fast that Yoojin couldn't keep up. She kept calling out for him to wait. She apologized, but he was 188 centimeters, and she was only 165 centimeters. With that kind of height difference, their walking speed was nowhere near the same. Since they'd be together everywhere, she asked him to at least slow down a little. Tayo didn't care whether she kept up or not. If she couldn't, that was her problem. All she had to do was push the button and quietly follow him. Was he a germaphobe or something? Afraid of catching something by touching buttons himself? Maybe this was part of his ridiculous usefulness test, making her silently press elevator buttons. She asked out of pure curiosity. After all, he could have pressed the button himself. It's not like he had broken fingers. His training at IDT was brutal. Weeks without sleep, endless intense drills. Yoojin noticed how suddenly serious his expression had become, unlike anything she'd seen before. Tayo told her how they trained in swamps and swam in seawater. They often didn't even get the chance to shower or wash their clothes. That was quite a long answer, but at least it confirmed he wasn't a germaphobe. She wanted him to wait because she didn't understand why he was testing her or trying to prove she was useless to him. He told her to prove why he needed her services, but honestly, she had no idea how to do that. Aside from driving or pressing elevator buttons, he couldn't imagine what else she could possibly do for him. She might think he was a jerk, but one day he'd regret it. The day she'd make him kneel. He sped up again, and Yoojin struggled to keep up. It made her even angrier. As they walked down the hallway, Tayo noticed a security camera pointed straight at him. He even wondered where Yoojin had gone. So the camera would record them together. Tayo walked fast, and Yoojin barely kept up, practically running through the crowd to avoid losing him. When she finally almost caught up, she tried to ask where he was going, but he didn't answer. She grew more and more irritated. Seriously, how hard was it to answer a simple question? Or was he just ignoring her on purpose, testing her patience? She noticed he kept looking around, but she couldn't figure out what exactly he was searching for. Yujin had no choice but to follow him. Maybe things would become clearer a little later. When the man suddenly stopped and glanced around again, Yujin asked what he was looking for and offered to help. He kept shifting his gaze, ceiling, walls, then ceiling again. What exactly was he trying to find, and could he at least tell her? Earlier, he'd said she could prove she was useful. Yujin felt confident she could help. After all, she once managed to find a lost cat. Tayo finally turned to her, but the way he looked at her made her uncomfortable. He asked her to imagine being a 20-year-old girl. Yujin almost laughed. She actually was around that age. She'd turn 30 next year, but technically, she was still in her 20s. Tayo stayed silent for a couple of minutes, then stated firmly that Yujin had been at this mall on Saturday. She'd parked her car in the underground parking lot, 4th floor, Zone C. Then she got into the elevator and calmly went up to the 1st floor. As usual, she looked composed and focused on her own business. After that, she disappeared into thin air. Her car sat in the parking lot for almost a week. During that time, she never showed up on either the 1st or the 4th floor. Yujin asked what she'd been wearing that day when she first appeared at the mall. The girl understood there had never been anything between Tayo and that girl, but she couldn't figure out what exactly he was trying to prove. He stood there silently, as if piecing together a logical chain of thoughts to lead him to the right conclusion. He needed to calm down and think. Most likely, the girl had planned to meet someone at the mall and had been in a hurry. The meeting spot was probably the restaurant area on the 6th floor. It was always quieter there, perfect for private conversations. But why did she get off on the 1st floor instead of going up to the 6th? Did she change her mind? No. It was much simpler. She had just arrived early. She probably wandered around the mall first, slowly making her way up the escalators to the 6th floor. For most girls, that was normal behavior. Surrounded by dozens of boutiques, they usually couldn't resist buying something. The reason Yujin asked about her outfit was simple. She believed that girl was meeting up with a man. Dinner and a movie, the classic date combo, and the mall even had rooftop parking. If the guy was also driving and they left in his car, it made perfect sense why she never came back to the underground lot. Yujin herself wouldn't have done that. Parking there was way too expensive. Tayo pointed out that if there'd been something on the 1st floor she'd wanted to see, Yujin's guess might actually make sense. It annoyed him to see Yujin trailing after him like a clueless goldfish, doing whatever nonsense he demanded. Though deep down, he figured she might still be useful. Yujin didn't like being called a clueless goldfish. He didn't know who she really was, and that ticked her off. While talking to Tayo, Yujin noticed other women glancing his way. Clearly, they found him handsome. She silently agreed he was attractive. But after spending just a little time with him, she realized his complicated personality made him nearly impossible to deal with. His difficult character and rude manners completely erased whatever charm his looks gave him. Appearances can be deceiving. Those strangers who admired his face had no clue about the jerk hiding beneath it. Lost in thought, Yujin didn't even notice when Tayo suddenly walked off again. Without saying a word, she had to run to catch up. There were lots of blind spots in the surveillance system. That's why they couldn't get a perfect picture of what happened. Tayo didn't expect to find many witnesses either. Payments were electronic now, and weekends were crowded. People rarely remembered details. While they were standing in the parking lot, thinking through the girl's actions, they didn't even notice a car speeding toward them. Yujin panicked. For some reason, she froze and couldn't move. The car whooshed past at high speed, the wind forcefully pushing her to the side. The driver raced out of the parking lot without even slowing down at the turns. Yujin was furious. She couldn't believe idiots like that were allowed to drive cars. But then she looked at Tayo and was stunned. Someone had almost died right next to him, and he didn't even flinch. Tayo ignored her again, still thinking about the situation with that girl. He decided to check the exit, while Yujin was supposed to head to the car. They'd meet at the main gate. She was pissed. She wasn't his servant, and she didn't have to follow his every order. She grumbled to herself. 8,001 for 40 minutes? That wasn't parking. That was daylight robbery. Could she at least expense it? As she drove out of the parking lot, Yujin spotted the car that had sped past her earlier. Could it really be the same jerk from the rooftop? She hated people like him. He didn't care about anyone else or what people thought of him. Oddly enough, the man was calm and collected, even though just a few minutes ago, he'd almost hit someone. Then she noticed Tayo waiting for her near the parking gate, standing not far from that jerk. The man, without even looking around, flicked his cigarette butt and missed his target. Yujin froze. She knew exactly what kind of temper Tayo had, and he definitely wouldn't like this. The cigarette butt floated toward him slowly, and Yujin prayed it wouldn't actually hit Tayo. It nearly did. If it had, things could have ended very badly. She tried to stop it with the sheer power of her thoughts, fully aware of how ugly this could get for that jerk. Tayo stopped. At first, he looked completely calm, but in his eyes, a plan was already forming. A plan to punish this jerk. There was no way he could just walk away. With a temper like his, he simply couldn't let it slide. Yujin was surprised when Tayo bent down, trying to pick up the cigarette butt from the ground. She couldn't even imagine why he was doing that. Tayo picked it up, and by then he already knew exactly what he was going to do with it to teach that jerk a lesson. Yujin didn't understand why. Out of the entire planet, that cigarette butt had to land right on Tayo at the worst possible time. One look at his face told her trouble was coming. She instantly decided she needed to stop him. The stranger noticed Tayo pick up the cigarette butt. Crossing his arms, he asked sarcastically what Tayo planned to do with it. The man didn't say a single word. Without even looking at the jerk, he just tossed the butt straight into the guy's car. The jerk went ballistic, yelling at him, asking if he had any idea how much that car cost. Tayo kept his cool and calmly replied, asking if the guy even knew what a trash can was, and that cigarette butts belonged there, not on the street. The jerk shouted even louder, calling Tayo a crazy freak. Watching from a distance, Yujin thought that this jerk had no idea who he was dealing with. With insults still flying out of his mouth, the man lunged at Tayo with his fists, not realizing what kind of trouble he'd just gotten himself into. Yujin already had a pretty good idea how this would end, and honestly, she was more worried for the jerk, because with his arrogance, he might really get hurt. Tayo had served in the military for a long time. His reflexes were flawless, and dodging a sloppy punch like that was no problem. He grabbed the guy's arm in an instant and twisted it behind his back, making the jerk cry out from the pain, struggling to break free. Holding him firmly, Tayo used his other hand to grab his head and slammed him down onto the hood of the car. The jerk screamed at Tayo to let him go while he was still being nice, but Tayo ignored him, replying only that he'd better never piss him off again. The pain was so intense that the man was sure his arm was about to snap. He couldn't take it anymore. Finally, he came to his senses and apologized to Tayo, swearing it would never happen again and that he understood everything now. Tayo was no longer interested in teaching the guy a lesson. He let him go, and the jerk practically fell headfirst into the car. Tayo was confident this kind of lesson would stick, and that the jerk would think twice before littering again. Yujin was relieved the whole scene was finally over. She was more than happy to see Tayo get into her car safe and sound. She asked if he ever thought about how weird it was to act like that in broad daylight. Though to be honest, it was kind of satisfying to watch. Guys like that jerk sometimes needed a wake-up call. She said it, but then regretted it. It felt like she was encouraging Tayo's aggressive behavior, and she didn't want him to think that kind of thing was normal. In general, she told him not to draw too much attention to himself, though she didn't actually say straight out to stay out of trouble. Yujin hoped the rest of the day would go smoothly. There was nothing else planned, so they headed back to the hotel. She'd said earlier she'd be watching him closely from now on. But right now, she needed to stop by home to grab some things so she could stay at the hotel later. She hadn't even finished speaking when Tayo got out of the car, like always, not bothering to listen to her to the end. Yujin tried yelling after him, but the unruly guy didn't even turn his head. She kept shouting anyway, hoping he'd at least hear her. She warned him not to cause trouble and to stay calm, because once he lost control, stopping him would be almost impossible. She didn't want him eating dinner without her. She wanted to bring him something tasty, so she asked him to wait for her at the hotel. Yujin returned to the hotel just as the sun was going down. She dragged behind her a small suitcase with almost all her essentials packed inside. The loud rattling of the cheap suitcase annoyed her, but it was all she had. She hadn't used it in ages. She came back later than planned, thanks to her mom. An hour earlier, her mom wouldn't let her leave, not understanding what kind of job required moving somewhere else. She was worried Yujin had gotten involved in some financial scam and was lying about it. But there was a surprise waiting for Yujin at the hotel, something she definitely didn't expect. Her CEO was there, greeting her warmly and inviting her to sit on the couch next to her. Jin Seoryong immediately noticed the branded fried chicken bag in Yujin's hands and realized she must have gotten pretty close with Tayo. Yujin felt like the CEO misunderstood, but she asked why the woman came to the hotel. Was it to visit her brother? Soryong thought what Yujin said earlier was absurd, since she had no interest in seeing him at all. Yujin couldn't understand why the CEO thought she and Tayo were suddenly so close. The woman explained she happened to be near the hotel and just wanted to see Yujin. Then, for some reason, she casually asked why Tayo had returned to Korea, pretending she wasn't actually curious. There had to be a solid reason for his return, so she decided to ask Yujin. Maybe Tayo had told her something. Did she really think Yujin was the kind of person Tayo would spill everything to? He didn't even tell his family anything, and he'd just met her last night. The CEO realized her mistake and apologized. Yujin wasn't sure whether to speak or not, but she had a feeling Tayo was looking for someone. Jin Seoryung was surprised. Her brother? Looking for someone? She suddenly got curious who it could be. Yujin didn't know, but then remembered she had a few questions of her own. She pulled a receipt from her pocket and asked if the company could cover the expenses. The CEO looked closely at the receipt. Her face changed immediately. She seemed lost for words. Yujin smiled to herself. What had she even expected? They'd already raised her salary sky high. Of course, there wouldn't be extra money for that. The CEO sighed, clearly upset she hadn't thought of this earlier. She pulled a credit card from her wallet and handed it to Yujin. It was the CEO's credit card. Yujin could use it to cover expenses whenever she needed. It wasn't a company card, so she could use it freely whenever necessary. But this black card was a luxury unlimited credit line in South Korea, and when the girl saw it, she froze for a moment. Jin Seoryung said it was fine. She could just think of it as part of the company's planned expenses, like buying snacks for the staff. Yujin asked if she could use the card to buy coffee at a nearby cafe, and the woman confirmed it. Even if one cup cost over 10,000 won, she could buy it. Did Yujin really think the CEO couldn't afford something that small for her dear secretary Seo? Yujin was happy and grateful when the woman told her she could drink as much coffee as she wanted. 10, even 20 cups a day. Honestly, Yujin had been planning to ask for extra pay for the dangers of the job and possible medical costs, but now she didn't have to worry about that anymore. If everything went well, the CEO would cover both the hazard pay and medical expenses, so Yujin had no reason to stress. The girl promised she'd give her all for the company, but the CEO didn't quite get what she meant. She worried that her brother might actually return only her bones. With that, Jin Seoryung suggested ending their conversation. She told Yujin not to tell Tayo that she had been at the hotel, hoping they had a clear understanding. She also asked Yujin to remind her brother to visit home in the next few days. He'd completely forgotten. He hadn't shown up to see her or their parents since coming back to Korea. Their father was furious about it. Yujin didn't know how she'd deliver the message, but she promised she would. The girl held the black card tightly in her hands, knowing it would make her feel safe just having it with her. She understood that generosity usually came with big resources. Only the rich could afford to act this relaxed. Or maybe it was something else. It felt like she'd just received a real treasure. Something powerful. By the way, she really did remember that Jin Tayo had come straight to the hotel from the airport without visiting his family. Who could be the person he was looking for? Someone more important than visiting his own parents first. His words at the mall were strange too, when he asked her to imagine being a 20-year-old girl. He'd been asking about a girl in her 20s. Maybe he was searching for someone he had once loved and been separated from. Yujin stepped into Tayo's room and loudly announced that she was back. She wasn't even surprised to see Tayo sitting at his desk, staring at his computer, not even acknowledging her osatsiyos. She asked him what he was working on, but she didn't really expect a reply anymore. She was used to talking to a wall. As she came closer, she saw that Tayo was watching security camera footage from the shopping mall. The man was surprised she told him not to have dinner, but then showed up with chicken. Yujin teased him, asking if he had a problem with it. Was he looking down on chicken? It was incredibly generous of her to buy him something she could only afford on payday. She opened the box and offered Tayo a taste before judging. Tayo decided to try the chicken since he was starving, and to his surprise, it wasn't as bad as he imagined. Yujin tried to get him to talk, joking that everyone who'd lived abroad always missed Korean fried chicken. Tayo asked if the girl had ever been abroad. She admitted she hadn't. She'd spent most of her life working to pay off her father's debts, never having enough for travel. The chicken was delicious, and they ate it quickly. They hadn't eaten all day. Yujin wanted Tayo to hear her out because not just she, but many others thought he was way too harsh. Plus, he didn't share a single drumstick and ate them all. Tayo asked if she didn't like the chicken breast she'd been enjoying so much. Yujin said no. She always saved the best for last, which is why she started with the breast. Tayo, on the other hand, was the type who ate the best part first and then everything else. Yujin was disappointed she didn't get a drumstick she loved so much, but next time she'd keep that in mind. If it weren't for the CEO's card, she might have smacked him and happily gotten fired. But not tonight. Tonight she was feeling too generous. When she tried asking Tayo if he'd learned anything new about that girl, he scolded her. Hadn't she ever been taught not to talk with her mouth full? She wondered how someone with such perfect manners could eat all the drumsticks without even offering one to the person next to him. After finishing their meal, they went back to the computer to keep watching the mall's security footage. Looking at the monitor, Yujin asked again if Tayo had found the car and what had happened to it. He stayed silent, annoyed that she was sticking her nose into his business. Her presence was starting to irritate him. The footage quality was awful, and it was hard to identify people's faces clearly. But Tayo had another angle. The man's face was still blurry, but the girl's was visible. She was the one he was looking for. The footage showed a 20-year-old girl getting into a car's passenger seat. Clearly, she wasn't alone. From her calm expression and behavior, it was obvious she got into the car willingly. If you looked closer, you could tell the car was a rental. But Yujin had no idea who the girl was. Tayo needed to test Yujin's analytical skills again. Maybe she could help him. He decided to tell her who the girl was. Her name was Lee Jongyong, a college student who'd gone missing a week ago. When her parents started searching, they found her car in the mall's parking lot. The last time anyone saw her was when she got out of the elevator on the first floor. It just so happened Tayo returned to Korea at the same time. Since he knew her father, the man asked him to help find his daughter. They hadn't filed a police report, which was strange, but it was their right. Tayo explained that they didn't want to risk making things worse. But Yujin didn't understand. If someone's missing and you don't go to the police, it looks suspicious. The footage clearly showed no crime was committed. Lee Jongyong willingly got into that car. From that moment on, the police had no reason to investigate further. Seo Yujin listened to the man carefully and came to the conclusion that this girl didn't seem to be someone close to him. Then she noticed he suddenly intended to go somewhere, even though he hadn't planned anything earlier. Curious, she asked where he was going since she was supposed to follow him everywhere. Tayo replied he was going out for dinner because half a chicken wasn't enough to fill anyone up and keep the hunger away. Yujin was stunned. He'd eaten almost the entire chicken himself, since she couldn't even finish her half. Finally, Yujin made it to her hotel room. She didn't want to do anything else, just crawl into bed and rest. She lay down quickly, but couldn't fall asleep because she was so thirsty. She had simply overeaten too much today. Even though she was exhausted, her thirst was stronger, so she decided to get up and find some water. She remembered there was still a bottle of water in the fridge, but she'd have to stop by the store tomorrow to buy more. As she passed through the living room, she nearly screamed from shock. Tayo was sitting silently on the couch in complete darkness. He sat there staring at a single spot, a drink in his hand. When she gasped and shouted, he didn't even flinch. He just sat there, motionless. Yujin caught herself thinking how good he looked sitting there, so calm and completely at ease. She slapped her cheek slightly, trying to shake the thought off. She needed to get a grip. But what was he even doing there at this hour? She briefly thought about pretending she hadn't seen anything. It felt like he was asleep sitting up, yet somehow still fully alert. No wonder he looked so serious, like he was replaying everything that happened today and making plans for tomorrow. Out of nowhere, he asked why she couldn't sleep either. But he still didn't turn his head toward her. He couldn't sleep because he spent almost the entire day training. Only then would he allow himself 3 to 4 hours of rest. It was the only way he ever got any sleep. She'd heard that people who struggle with sleep are often more sensitive to their surroundings. Maybe that's why he had such a guarded, tense personality. Even several hours of morning training weren't enough to wear him out. The man finally turned his head and looked at Yujin, who stood before him in her not-so-flattering pajamas. She was amazed by how he always seemed to sense the exact moment to look at her, as if he could read her mind. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. They stared at each other but didn't know what to say. Yujin walked over to the window and was struck by how beautiful the city looked from the skyscraper's height. She'd never seen anything like it before. It was already deep into the night, but plenty of people were still awake. Korea was unusually quiet. The faint hum of passing cars and motorcycles was barely audible. Somewhere outside, cats meowed and drunk men brawled, but those sounds were just part of normal city life. Even the sound of the wind was muffled by the soundproof walls, which made the silence feel almost suffocating. When Tayo called Korea quiet, Yujin was surprised. Just how intense had the place he came from been, if the silence felt foreign to him? He stared out the window, lost in thoughts about some place that clearly wasn't this quiet. It must have been incredibly hard for him to return from the army to civilian life without carrying heavy scars. Yujin could only guess what kind of sounds he was used to hearing at night. She couldn't even imagine how he truly felt. Gunfire, explosions, constant danger, those things harden people, make them colder, and strip away compassion. Still thirsty, Yujin finally walked to the fridge to pour herself a glass of water. It was strange. She was so tired from the day, yet she couldn't fall asleep. She decided to make Tayo some tea, believing it worked better than alcohol when it came to sleepless nights. Tayo knew very well this wasn't ordinary insomnia, and tea wouldn't help. Yujin didn't quite understand what he meant. If he couldn't sleep, wasn't that insomnia? Either way, if he drank the tea and fell asleep, maybe he'd at least start to believe it wasn't so bad. If he didn't like tea, there were always medications. She asked if he had ever tried solving the problem with pills. He calmly asked her where she thought he had been all this time. She should have guessed. She'd been observing him all day. "What do you think would have happened if I'd been drugged up and didn't notice the enemy approaching?" he said. Yujin didn't want to hear any more. She said goodnight and headed to her bed. He frowned, frustrated that Yujin didn't want to hear the rest of his story. Was she really not curious at all? When the girl disappeared into her room, Tayo stayed on the couch, glass of liquor in hand, staring out at the night city. Thinking about Yujin, he realized she was a funny, annoying little thing who somehow managed to get under his skin with her bold attitude. The next day, Yujin was amazed by how beautiful this place was. She hadn't been here in years. She asked Tayo if he knew she had graduated from this very college. The place hadn't changed at all since then. She remembered everything Tayo had told her on the way to the college and tried to follow his instructions. Still, she insisted he at least explain the details to her a little more. Tayo didn't think it was necessary. She just needed to do exactly as he said. She began to wonder if he might have been a commanding officer in the army. He didn't think she'd remember everything at once, so he repeated what he'd said in the car. She needed to get information from Lee Jong-young's friends, just like he'd told her before, and make sure they didn't know about her disappearance. Yujin reassured him. She'd been in the drama club for 3 years in high school. In drama club, she had been a promising talent and often played key supporting roles. When Tayo asked what role she played, she smiled and said, "A mandarin tree." She believed that the size of the role didn't matter, only the talent to play it well. And honestly, that little moment in her life was something she remembered most fondly. When the college girls noticed Tayo, they were immediately intrigued. They wondered who he was. Could he be a senior? They thought he was handsome and wanted to get to know him better. Yujin noticed the girls' interest in Tayo, but couldn't understand it. They had such bright futures, but apparently no sense of taste. Tayo asked if Yujin had learned anything about Lee Jong-young. She had met all of her close friends, but didn't hear a single thing about a boyfriend. There wasn't even the slightest hint that she had one. But they did say she'd started acting strange about a month ago. She was always busy or doing something, constantly glued to her phone during lectures. Even the professors began scolding her for it. Tayo took note of the fact that all these changes began exactly a month ago. And then Tayo had to take a look at what Yujin was showing him on her phone. She checked whether Jonghyun had a social media account, since almost everyone does these days. Yujin noticed that Lee Jonghyun used to post videos and photos of herself playing the piano or performing on stage. But about a month ago, the tone of her posts changed drastically. She started posting pictures of what and where she ate. There were also a lot of movie ticket photos. She was going to the cinema nearly every weekend. By analyzing all of her posts, it was easy to conclude she had been going on dates. Tayo scrolled through Lee Jonghyun's social media page, wanting to make sure the information could actually help them. He then said they should head back to the car. But Yujin couldn't hold back her curiosity and asked where they were going next. As always, Tayo was brief. He just said they were going home to analyze the information they'd gathered. But first, Tayo decided to stop by his parents' house to visit them. Since he hadn't seen them once since returning to Korea, when Yujin arrived at the house, she was pleasantly surprised. She noticed the parking area was even bigger than her own home. She might have been just an escort, but seriously, Why did he ask her to wait in the car? He could be eating for an hour or two, and she wasn't planning on having a full dinner anyway, so why couldn't she just go with him? She figured she should at least ask when he'd be back so she wouldn't sit in the car all that time. Maybe this was her chance to use the director's black card. Yujin was surprised when she saw the CEO's car arriving at the house as well. The girl stepped out of the car and went over to Jin Soryung to greet her. The woman was surprised too. She definitely didn't expect to see Secretary Seo here. She asked if her brother had actually decided to visit their parents' house. When she asked how long ago Tae-oh had gone inside, Yujin said it had been almost 30 minutes. Seoryung was disappointed. She thought he'd picked a terrible time to visit. She didn't want Yujin just standing in the parking lot, so she invited her to come inside. The girl didn't really see why she needed to be there for a family conversation, but maybe her presence could help keep emotions in check. Was Yujin really here not to have dinner with them? Why did she suddenly decide to leave so soon? Tae-oh finally met his sister and tried to explain he came only to say hello. The CEO was surprised. After all this time, he couldn't even stay for a family dinner? Did he not realize how much that would hurt their parents? Tae-oh tried to explain that he simply didn't have time for family gatherings right now. He was too busy. But once he had time, he promised he would have dinner with them. Brother and sister hadn't seen each other for so long that they didn't even know what to talk about. Still, both tried, though it didn't go very well. Tae-oh advised his sister to pay more attention to their father's health. His blood pressure had risen even more since their last meeting. She needed to make sure he saw a doctor. She was surprised that Tae-oh was lecturing her about it, knowing full well it was partly his fault their father's health had gotten worse. Tae-oh said goodbye to his sister and quickly headed to the car. Yujin smiled and waved goodbye to the director as well. Jin Soryung stood in the parking lot, watching the car drive away. She realized her brother hadn't changed at all, still acting like a total jerk. Now it was time to get back to the case they hadn't been able to solve yet. Thanks to their persistence, they'd finally found something that might help locate the missing girl. They never imagined they'd get their hands on those transaction records, so they were thrilled. It was a big win to find Lee Jong-young's credit card history. It revealed where she'd been over the past week. There were transactions at the cafeteria, cafes, and some online purchases. Yujin noted her lifestyle had been pretty consistent. But a month ago, something changed. Suddenly, there were transactions at a department store, a nail salon, and an auto repair shop. Since even her friends didn't know she had a boyfriend, it was likely he didn't go to the same college. If she met him at one of those three places, the department store or the auto shop seemed far more likely than the nail salon. Tae-oh decided they should check the auto shop first. Yujin was to review the transactions from the 3 days following her visit there. Yujin was puzzled. Why 3 days? What could have happened in that time? It turned out she'd gone back to the same auto shop, but this time she'd spent very little. Her social media posts started to shift around that same time, which was odd since she'd never had these kinds of expenses before. There were plenty of restaurant and cafe photos, but no matching transactions. A guy might pay once or twice, but covering every single check? That stood out. So the logical conclusion was that this guy was putting in effort, trying to impress her. Exactly. Lee Jong-young's boyfriend clearly wanted to look good in her eyes. If he could afford to pay for her, that likely meant he was an office worker, but didn't have his own car. If he did have a car, she wouldn't have needed to drive to the mall herself. On top of that, he'd rented a car. He probably should have just told her he'd be driving too. Tae-oh fully agreed with Yujin's conclusions, and she was genuinely proud to prove how smart and useful she could be to him. Tae-oh decided to head out again. Yujin guessed he was hungry and wanted dinner. He invited her to come along, joking that he'd let her magical fingers push the elevator buttons. Evening had fallen once again, and the city lights shone even brighter than the night before. Tae-oh walked into the living room to sit quietly and look at the night city through the window, but then he noticed something moving on the couch. He immediately realized that Yujin must have made herself comfortable on the couch for the night, but still asked why she decided to sleep here of all places. Yujin hadn't expected him to return so soon, so she chose the couch because it felt the most comfortable to her. Dressed in a bathrobe, Tae-oh looked completely different, softer and less strict than he usually did in his regular clothes. He asked why she gave up her perfectly cozy bed to sleep in the living room. Yujin didn't know what to say at first, but then explained that it was too quiet in her room and she couldn't fall asleep. Could it really be that she found an alternative to her magical bed and chose this couch and the noise from the street? Yujin got up from the couch and noticed he was drinking alcohol again. She wanted to remind him that she'd already told him to drink tea instead, When she was a child, her parents used to tell her that chamomile tea helped with insomnia, and they always drank it together. After making Tayo a big cup of tea, Yujin lay back down on the couch, wished for a quiet night, turned to the other side, and tried to fall asleep. She must have been exhausted and comforted by not being alone. She fell asleep fast. Tayo sat on the opposite couch, watching how sweetly Yujin slept, and even felt a little jealous of how easily she could do it. He spent almost the entire night in the living room, waiting until the sun started to rise. But he didn't feel sleepy at all. Yujin woke up in the morning, not expecting to see Tayo nearby. She stretched sweetly. She'd slept peacefully and well. As she stretched, she didn't even notice Tayo walking toward her from another room. It felt like he hadn't slept at all. He asked how she slept and how she was feeling. Now she could compare which was better, her bed or the living room couch. But his face didn't look like someone who actually cared about how she slept. To look the way Tayo did now, he definitely needed more than just a couple hours of sleep. But for the first time in a while, he'd actually slept deeply and felt rested. Yujin curiously asked where exactly he'd slept. Where else could he have slept but his own room? Did she really think he'd sneak around in the middle of the night just to find another place to sleep? Yujin thought he was lying. He'd once said he couldn't sleep well because it was too quiet and he had to sleep on the couch. She couldn't believe he actually slept in his comfy bed. Apparently, she was the only one with sensitive sleep. Tayo noticed just how soundly she slept. She didn't even wake up when he went to and returned from training. But Yujin's neck and shoulders were sore from sleeping on the couch. Tayo asked if she wanted to join him for breakfast or had changed her mind. Yujin was starving, so of course she agreed. Besides, her job was to keep an eye on him. Skipping wasn't an option. According to their plan, today they were going to visit the auto shop that Lee Jong-young had supposedly gone to. At the shop, a mechanic greeted them and asked how he could help. Yujin pointed to her car and said she wanted to get the oil changed. The mechanic was surprised. He could tell right away she had a luxury car. She clarified that the car was indeed nice, but unfortunately, it belonged to the company she worked for. He smiled, said it would only take a minute, and quickly started changing the oil. The girl mentioned that she'd seen a young guy working there before, but he didn't seem to be around today. Without stopping his work, the mechanic asked if she meant Mr. Young. Yujin smiled. Yes, that must have been his name. He'd promised to give her perfect service next time, but he wasn't there today. The mechanic said the guy hadn't shown up for about 10 days. He hadn't had time to find a replacement yet and was pretty annoyed about the sudden resignation. Yujin remarked that it must be tough working alone. The mechanic admitted he'd asked the guy to stay longer, but Jung just hung up coldly. He had been a good worker and great with customers, too. Yujin did her best to distract the mechanic so Tayo could look around the shop more carefully. But she didn't understand why he was taking so long. If they got caught, they wouldn't be able to get more information. The mechanic noticed it looked like Yujin had changed the oil not too long ago. She pretended not to know anything about it. She claimed that couldn't be true since the car had been making noises every time she stopped. She asked him to check it more thoroughly. Maybe the problem wasn't the oil after all, the mechanic thought, deciding to take a closer look. Plus, she looked like someone who could pay well. Tayo was rummaging in one place for quite a while. Yujin figured he must have found something interesting. She didn't get how he could just search through someone else's workspace without permission and act like it was perfectly normal. If it weren't for her distraction skills, they'd definitely have been caught. But Tayo didn't respond or thank her. The girl realized he was ignoring her again, but didn't make a big deal out of it. Tayo walked ahead and finally stopped, saying this was the place they needed. According to the service center's records, their guy, Young In-ho, lived in this building. But they couldn't just barge into his home like that. They needed a believable reason to visit. Yujin thought maybe Lee Jong-young had willingly gotten into his car. Maybe they'd run away for love. Who was she to interfere in someone's relationship? Tayo didn't care about her principles or whether there was love involved. He was just doing the job he was hired to do. So he told her to forget everything she'd just said and focus on the mission. Seo Yujin, the promising drama club talent, Tayo said with heavy irony. Something in his voice made her nervous. He told Yujin that today she'd play a leading role. She hadn't been ready for that, but she had no choice. She asked what exactly she needed to do. She'd have to use her acting skills and make it convincing. There wouldn't be a second chance. His words genuinely scared her. She understood that one wrong move could cost them a lot. Plan A was to break down the front door. and Plan B was to use a rope, climb down from the roof, and enter through the balcony. Plan C was to use her acting skills to make him open the door himself. Yujin couldn't believe that in such a short time, this crazy guy had come up with 3 completely absurd plans. But he was genuinely waiting for her decision. The final call was hers. He didn't care what she chose. His goal was simply to get into Young's apartment. Yujin leaned more toward Plan C, though she could avoid direct participation. Plan B sounded tempting too, but it was too risky and harsh. She knew he would be less tense in front of a woman. But first, she had to admit to him that she had never really been the promising talent of the drama club. But he ignored her again and headed straight for the apartment they needed. At the door, Teo pulled a pair of dark gloves from his pocket and put them on. Yujin didn't understand why he needed gloves. They were counting on him opening the door voluntarily, relying only on her talent. Teo explained that the situation could get complicated if his fingerprints were found, which could bring trouble with the police. But why didn't he think about her? She could leave fingerprints too, and then the trouble could fall on her. He reassured her that wearing gloves would actually look suspicious for her, so it was better he wore them. Gathering her courage, Yujin finally knocked on the door. She didn't even notice her hand trembling slightly. She pulled her blouse sleeve over her hand, better safe than sorry, since her fingerprints could be left on the door. The apartment was empty. No one was there, and the lights were off. They hesitated, but had to step inside to make sure the place was really empty. Yujin didn't hear anyone and was convinced the apartment was empty, so technically they didn't need to go in. But Teo was sure he had seen a shadow on the balcony. He wanted Yujin to show off her outstanding skills she often bragged about. She was genuinely scared. She had no skills in deception or breaking into apartments, and her acting talent wouldn't help now. She tried knocking again, saying she was the downstairs neighbor and water was dripping from the ceiling. Maybe a pipe had burst. Could the apartment really be empty? If someone was deliberately ignoring her, she might have to call the police. After her words, they heard footsteps behind the door and waited for someone to answer. Yujin was genuinely terrified. She had no idea what she would do when the door opened. They heard a faint click, and the door creaked open. A young man peeked out, asking what they needed since nothing had happened in his apartment. The fact that the guy had ignored their knocks meant he either had something to hide or was really scared of something. When he peeked through the crack, Yujin immediately recognized him. It really was the guy from the resume they'd seen earlier. The girl had a great photographic memory, remembering everything down to the smallest detail. Apartment 301 in the Wuzhong district, everything matched. From the photos, this guy looked identical to the one peeking from his apartment. Young In-ho asked again why they needed anything and why they had been knocking so persistently. Nothing had happened in his apartment. Yujin continued playing the role of the neighbor, complaining that water was dripping from her ceiling and it looked really bad. She asked if he planned to do anything about it. The guy insisted it was impossible. It seemed like he didn't believe her at all, constantly denying any wrongdoing. She had to act very angry. She couldn't understand what he meant by impossible. She insisted there was a flood in her apartment and wondered if he was implying she was lying. Of course, he didn't want to accuse her, but he had no intention of letting her into his apartment either. He knew a lonely elderly couple lived below him, so he asked again, why was she deceiving him? Hearing this from Young, Yujin didn't know what to say next, so she had to improvise. She couldn't mess this up. She needed to strengthen her performance and fully commit to her role. She quickly came up with the idea that she was the couple's granddaughter. She had just come to stay a few days while looking for a job, but for now, that detail didn't matter. Why didn't he just come downstairs himself and see for himself if he didn't trust her words? That way no one could later claim they had nothing to do with it. Young said he'd fix everything and settle any inconvenience later, but right now he was way too busy to help. When Young In-ho tried to slam the door, the girl couldn't let him. The first thought that came to her mind was to jam her foot in the doorway. She'd seen this trick before. She screamed immediately because it hurt, realizing she might have overdone it and didn't know what to do next. When the guy said he'd go downstairs with her, he was really just trying to close the door to engage the crosslock. Yujin trusted him, expecting him to leave his apartment, but she never imagined he just wanted to slam the door in her face. Teo knew the trick well and quickly grabbed the door with his hand, stopping the guy from locking it. Young In-ho realized the girl at his door wasn't alone and tried to push the stranger away with force. But he failed. Teo was way stronger. He opened the door fast and moved to enter the apartment. The guy shouted, "What the hell's going on? Who the hell are you to barge into my apartment like this?" Tayo punched him in the chest but kept a firm grip on his sweater to stop him from falling. Then, after hitting him again, Young flew across the room and crashed to the floor at the far end. Tayo told Yujin to lock the front door and the balcony window. She understood immediately and hurried to do it. First, she locked the front door with the heavy, sturdy lock. Then she ran to the balcony to secure the window, knowing the guy could try to escape any second. Young barely got back on his feet, still not understanding who they were or what they wanted from him. Tayo didn't bother with small talk. He had one question, the reason he was even in this apartment. Where's Lee Jung-young? Young In-ho pretended not to understand why he was being asked about this girl. He couldn't possibly know where she was. He, staying alert, grabbed a kitchen knife and threatened Tayo, saying, "Do you really think you'll leave this apartment alive after what you've done with your accomplice?" Tayo wasn't surprised. He was ready for this. All he cared about was keeping Yujin out of the fight. Knife threats didn't faze him. He still needed an answer and wasn't going anywhere without it. Yujin knew that if Young claimed he didn't know where Lee Jung-young was, it meant he must be familiar with her. Otherwise, the guy would have asked who this girl was and why Tayo was asking about her. Young In-ho's words had exposed him, confirming Tayo's suspicion that he was involved in her disappearance. As Tayo stepped closer, the guy waved the knife, warning he'd cut him if he came another step, but Tayo wasn't intimidated. Tayo knew exactly what to do. He stripped off his jacket and held it in front of him like a shield. Young In-ho continued threatening, insisting he wasn't joking. Tayo locked eyes with him, showing he was stronger and fearless despite the threats. Young got nervous, realizing this guy wasn't easily intimidated. Without hesitation, he lunged at Tayo, screaming and brandishing the knife. Dodging his clumsy knife swings wasn't hard. He clearly wasn't a pro. Tayo quickly wrapped Young's arms in his jacket, stopping him from swinging the knife further. Before he knew it, the guy's arms were trapped, and he couldn't do anything. Tayo elbowed him in the nose, disorienting him completely. Young slumped to the floor, blood gushing from his nose. He couldn't fight anymore. Tayo pinned him down, twisted his arm, and asked the same question one last time, demanding an answer. "Where is Lee Jung-young?" Young In-ho dodged the question again, asking why it concerned him. Tayo pressed his knee into Young's back, hearing bones crack. The guy screamed in pain but still refused to answer. Just then, Yujin rushed in, shouting for Tayo to stop immediately. Was he trying to kill him? Young hadn't come out despite all the noise, meaning Lee Jung-young might not even be there. Continuing this would make headlines. Yujin didn't think Tayo should go that far. It wouldn't help him. Tayo didn't plan to stop. He stepped on the guy's hand with his boot, pressing for the answer about the girl. Yujin couldn't watch anymore. She silently begged Buddha to show mercy and save them. She turned away and heard a strange sound through the closed door. Peeking through the glass, she couldn't believe her eyes. She'd never seen anything like it. She called Tayo over to look. There was no need for questions anymore. The answer was clear. Tayo didn't understand what the girl saw that required his attention. Could it be Lee Jung-young hiding in another room? Yujin was furious, calling Jung In-ho a monster and ready to deal with him herself. On the floor lay a girl, barely moving. Her hands and feet were tightly bound, and her mouth sealed with tape. For some reason, Tayo didn't rush, even though Yujin was calling him frantically. Judging by her expression, it was clear she was in shock from what she'd just seen. To make sure the guy didn't pose a threat, Tayo hit him hard on the head, knocking him unconscious. With him out of the way, he could finally go after Yujin and see with his own eyes what was happening in the other room. The girl stood in front of the door, unable to bring herself to open it. She was certain she'd see something she could never unsee. When she finally opened it, she barely noticed the girl lying on the floor of the empty room. She froze, unable to believe this was happening in real life. She had only ever seen something like this in movies. They called the girl's name to check if she was alive. She just croaked back, unable to respond properly because her mouth was taped shut. The best news at that moment, she was alive, even though she was exhausted and covered in bruises. Yujin was stunned. Could this guy who seemed so sweet at first glance really be a monster with maniacal tendencies? They needed to untie her hands and feet, but the bindings were tight, so they'd need a knife to speed things up. Yujin couldn't bear to watch. Tears filled her eyes and she could barely see what was in front of her. Finally, they managed to free her hands, but under the tape, they saw huge bruises covering her arms and legs. Tayo quickly lifted Lee Jung-young into his arms. They needed to get her out of that apartment fast and to a medical facility for treatment. As they were leaving Young's apartment, Yujin asked what would happen to that idiot. They couldn't just leave him alone in the apartment. Tayo said he didn't necessarily need to do anything to him, but he was sure from this moment on, young Inho's life would become unbearable. Young came too, screaming after them that he had wanted to finish her off. But she kept crying about her family strangling her with pressure and complaining about her old father. So he had let her into his home and even cared for her for a while. The next moment, Yujin spun around and kicked the bastard with all her might. She crossed her arms over her chest to resist the urge to beat him up and shouted, "How can someone like him talk about caring?" In her opinion, he deserved a good beating. Tayo froze with the girl in his arms. He hadn't expected this fragile and seemingly sweet girl to have so much strength and anger inside her. He even felt respect for her. They were rushing to the emergency center because they wanted to get Jonghyun there as quickly as possible. It was clear she needed immediate medical attention. While the doctors were examining the girl, Yujin and Tayo waited anxiously for the verdict on her condition. They noticed a man approaching them, looking deeply worried. It was Jonghyun's father. Tayo had informed him about his daughter. Tayo greeted Jonghyun's father with a formal military salute, but the man told him it wasn't necessary since Tayo was no longer in service and could relax a little. At first, Tayo didn't want to tell the whole story about his investigation, so he simply said that his daughter was inside the examination room. The man silently shook Jin Tayo's hand, unable to express the depth of his gratitude for saving his daughter's life. Jonghyun's father entered the hospital room in heavy silence, not knowing what awaited him inside. Yujin understood perfectly. This moment meant a lot to him. Since Jonghyun was now safe under medical supervision and her father's care, it was time for them to return to the hotel and get some rest. Yujin was completely exhausted, and as soon as she reached the hotel room, she collapsed onto the bed trying to fall asleep. The memories of everything that happened that day wouldn't let her rest, so she kept tossing and turning. There was one more thing keeping her awake, something that was seriously bothering her and making her anxious. Unable to stand it any longer, Yujin sat up and finally decided to ask what Tayo's problem was, why he wouldn't just let her sleep. The man stayed completely calm and asked her whether she planned to do her job. Yujin was confused. What job could he mean when it was already the middle of the night? Tayo didn't answer. He simply turned his gaze toward the couch in the shared room, wanting her to figure out what he meant on her own. Was he seriously suggesting that she should sleep on the couch so he could enjoy the comfort of the bed all to himself? He didn't see anything strange about it. After all, she had no idea how much a non-commissioned officer earned per month. Yujin really didn't know, since she had never interacted with soldiers and that kind of information wasn't made public. A sergeant with 7 years of experience earned about 2.5 million won before taxes, sometimes even 3.5 million, depending on hazard pay. He was paid for missions involving rescuing hostages from hijacked ships, but even that amount didn't compare to the danger of the job. That's why Tayo asked how much his sister was paying Yujin. Yujin understood what he meant, but she couldn't reveal the details of her deal with his sister or their arrangement. At first, she didn't know what to say, but eventually replied that her pay was somewhat similar to his. Not specific, but enough for her. Tayo clarified that he wasn't talking about her company's salary, but about the money she earned for following him around like some clueless goldfish. At that moment, Yujin considered Tayo her boss, and herself, his obedient subordinate. Maybe she wasn't a real soldier, but being around him felt like risking her life every second. Then she realized that her little joke didn't amuse Tayo at all, so she quickly changed her tone, saying that the couch would be just fine for her. If her back broke in half, she could always glue it back together later. No one would even notice. She offered Tayo some tea again, saying it was better than alcohol, even for people who didn't struggle with insomnia. Of course, he appreciated the gesture, but still held his glass of strong liquor. Old habits die hard. Yujin lay down on the couch quickly, but she couldn't stop worrying about whether Lee Jonghyun was really going to be okay. She thought again about that bastard and regretted not hitting him harder. Maybe then he'd finally understand what it's like to be on the receiving end. Tayo sat near the bed, watching Yujin as she kept tossing and turning on the couch, unable to get comfortable. She asked him why he was staring at her like that. Wasn't he planning to go to his comfortable bed and finally rest? Maybe he didn't like her calling that creep a bastard, but she always spoke her mind. She didn't add a single word she didn't mean. He had no idea why Yujin suddenly got angry. He hadn't said a word, let alone criticized her comments or behavior. That bastard had kidnapped a naive college girl and done disgusting things to her. As a normal person, that infuriated Yujin. Tayo actually found it amusing that Yujin spoke with such passion. It made him laugh. He reminded her that she wasn't the one who'd been kidnapped. She wanted him to explain what he meant because his vague remarks only irritated her more. Tayo explained that Yujin didn't even know Lee Jung-young personally. She had known nothing about her before this incident. That was true, but people get angry not only about what happens to them personally, they also care about what happens around them. Of course, it would have hit harder if it happened to her, but she couldn't stay indifferent to others' pain. Like hearing news about a child murdered by their own parents without any sign of remorse. Or a report about a police officer who sacrificed his own life to save a stranger. She might not have known those people personally, but such stories always disturbed and saddened her. Tayo thought Yujin didn't notice him quietly drinking again, but she pointed out once more that tea would help him sleep better. Yujin suddenly wondered if Tayo's years in the army had made it hard for him to sleep peacefully. Maybe after so many years, he simply couldn't rest properly anymore. It seemed like he'd forgotten what real silence felt like. Tayo thought about it for a moment. He just needed time to adjust to normal city life and learn how to enjoy the quiet again. Yujin called him Mr. Jin, curious about why he had chosen to become a soldier in the first place. When he looked at Yujin, he realized she had made herself comfortable, ready to listen to the story of his military past. Did he really think that, in his place, Yujin would have avoided such a harsh environment? Working in an underwater demolition team was anything but easy, especially for a third-generation chaebol. What if luck had turned its back on him and he'd met his death instead? Just imagine, dying without even spending all his money. That thought alone sounded terrifying. Tayo listened to Yujin's long, boring lecture and finally asked if she ever planned to sleep. But when Yujin tried to fall asleep, Tayo kept talking, saying that once a thought crossed his mind that he'd never considered before. Holding a glass filled with ice and alcohol, he believed that he'd be able to cool off his head if he overworked his body. Yujin had once held a mistaken belief. She thought he'd joined the army just to legally beat people. Of course, she never said that out loud. She assumed he did it out of a sense of duty or honor, like some noble prince serving in the military. It was unusual to see a third-generation chaebol in an underwater demolition team. Compared to him, other soldiers' lives seemed almost like a fairy tale. Their conversation went on, but Tayo asked her once again if she was ever going to sleep. The morning turned out to be tough for Yujin. It was safe to say it had been the worst night of her life. All she could think was how cruel Tayo was. A real sadist. He'd made her sleep on that horrible couch while he enjoyed the comfort of a soft bed. He had no sense of duty at all. What on earth had they taught him in the military? He clearly didn't know how to treat others. Leaving the room, Yujin clutched her aching sides. When Tayo heard her muttering, he simply walked past without a glance. Was he really that cold and heartless? Completely lacking compassion even toward a woman? When they reached the elevator, Yujin was pleasantly surprised to see Tayo actually reaching out to press the button himself. She hesitated, shocked. The man asked what she was waiting for. They needed to get going. What had happened to make him do it himself, she wondered. She couldn't believe her eyes. Tayo had truly pressed the elevator button with his own finger. Who would have thought that the same hands that had beaten people could look so beautiful? His rough fingers seemed like works of art. No wonder she wanted to prove her worth somehow. There weren't many other ways to do it. Yujin had never imagined she'd live to see the day Tayo pressed an elevator button. She could almost die happy now. Of course, she didn't actually want to die. It was just a joke. She planned to live a long, happy life. But her words clearly made Tayo want to dissect her mentally. Realizing her joke had failed, Yujin quickly tried to change the subject to avoid awkwardness. Their first plan for the day was simple. Grab a nice breakfast before heading out. When Yujin opened the menu, she spotted her favorite dish, mango bingsu, the most delicious thing in the world. It was expensive, but worth every bite. That Korean dessert made of finely shaved ice just melted in her mouth. Tayo only ordered coffee, so Yujin decided to offer him a bite. Maybe he wanted to try it. When he refused, she sighed in relief. More mango bingsu for her. Over breakfast, Yujin asked what Tayo's plans were for the day, since she'd have to tag along everywhere. Fine, she thought. She was happy enough even if he didn't want to share his plans. Tayo calmly sipped his coffee, staying silent as always. Yujin kept trying to start a conversation, hoping to get at least something out of him. She joked about whether he'd really let her go after the 3 months were up. They made a good team. She was the brains, he was the brawn. She played the drama actress, he was the action star. Tayo asked if she hadn't risked her life just to get assigned to the planning department. But Yujin wasn't in a rush to climb the corporate ladder. Life was good when you lived it to the fullest and enjoyed every moment. Didn't she ever think that she was already living her best life now? But Yujin believed being right wasn't always necessary. Tayo teased her. Did she think he couldn't sleep without her? Yujin replied that thanks to her, he probably slept just fine these days. She really had helped him a lot with that past incident. He knew she was once part of a drama club, though she'd admitted she wasn't exactly a star performer. Anyway, Tayo needed a reliable driver, someone he knew well. When he asked if she really thought being his driver would pay a huge salary, Yujin couldn't even respond. Did she just want to make a lot of money without caring about the job? Why agree to something she clearly didn't like? Their conversation was interrupted when Yujin noticed Jonghyung's father behind her. Seeing them, he walked over to say hello. The first thing Yujin asked was how his daughter was doing. Even though she didn't know her personally, she genuinely worried about the poor girl. Thankfully, Lee Jonghyung was recovering, and the man expressed deep gratitude for their help. Yujin let out a relieved sigh. The man turned to Yujin, saying he'd heard she'd played an important role in saving his daughter. But Yujin didn't see herself as a hero. She hadn't done much. Even Tayo couldn't stay quiet. He said she'd done a lot. She brushed it off, saying it was just a drop in the ocean compared to what Tayo had accomplished. Still, she was secretly thrilled. It was his first compliment to her. Tayo said that breaking the kidnapper's nose had been the right move. She'd acted bravely despite the danger. Yujin didn't know what to say. She'd hit the guy mostly out of anger, but it worked. The man thanked her for it. He was especially grateful to Sergeant Tayo. He'd known that once the guy got involved, his daughter would be found. But if anyone was to blame, it was the father, for not watching over his daughter more closely. Tayo had just hoped to find her sooner. Thankfully, her injuries weren't as bad as he'd feared. He'd soon be able to take her home. As for the kidnapper, Korea followed the law and justice would be served. After that conversation, Tayo noticed the man looked troubled, deep in thought. He asked if everything was okay. The man said that if only he'd called the police sooner, when he found the car, or even earlier when his daughter didn't come home, things might have been different. Maybe then she wouldn't have suffered so much and could have come home much earlier. He turned to Tayo, who was ready to listen. Maybe there was still something he could do to help. There are many important things in life: fame, fortune, power, health, family, friends, even beliefs. But the key is to never lose sight of what truly matters. "Don't repeat my mistake," the man said. At first, Tayo didn't understand what he meant, but listened carefully. Maybe these words would help him someday. Thankfully, Lee Jonghyung was lucky. She had a father who, even if a little late, learned to put her above everything else. The pain she felt had been worse than a stray dog's bite, but she would recover, both body and mind. The man was surprised by Yujin's remark, but appreciated her sincerity. A stray dog's bite. That was harsh, but he didn't question her way of thinking. What happened was just an accident. He didn't blame his daughter at all. Then he turned to Tayo, curious how he was adjusting to civilian life. Knowing he had always lived as a soldier, he worried, but it seemed the young man was doing better than expected. Things weren't that bad, Tayo thought. After all, if he'd managed to avoid a court-martial for beating his commander, life couldn't be too terrible. Hearing that, Yujin froze in shock. Then again, knowing his temper, she wasn't entirely surprised. But why had he done it? Beating a commanding officer was a serious crime, one that could have easily landed him in prison. Could he really have beaten up his commander? What kind of person is he anyway? Yujin couldn't understand. Tayo tried to explain that the commander's incompetence nearly cost their troops their lives, and he just couldn't stand by and watch. The man believed Tayo was completely right, which was why they showed him leniency, suspending him instead of dishonorably discharging him. He'd also heard Tayo was on a 3-month probation and that the commander took quite a beating. Fortunately, that meant their troops were safe for 12 whole weeks, without that scoundrel around. It was time to wrap things up. He'd received a phone call earlier, but only a general instruction. The details would come by email. The man thought Tayo was the best fit for this mission despite repeated objections. He voted in his favor, hoping the young man understood what that meant. Yujin had no idea what they were talking about. She tried to analyze the whole conversation, but nothing made sense in her head. She wondered what kind of mission Teo was supposedly suited for. Was it something important or dangerous again? The man stood up, saying Tayo had never disappointed him before, and he hoped he'd handle this job well too. He said it was a pleasure meeting Yujin and suggested they meet again sometime if the chance arose. He said goodbye to Yujin and Tayo and was about to leave when Yujin wished his daughter a speedy recovery. They decided to head back to their room and waited for the elevator. When they entered, they noticed another couple already inside, going up as well. When Yujin pressed the button for the 40th floor, she noticed the couple was headed to the 39th. They live on the 39th floor, Yujin thought? So, just one floor below us. Tayo stayed silent, occasionally glancing at the couple, a little suspiciously as if something was on his mind. The elevator doors opened on the 39th floor, and the couple started to exit. Yujin smiled warmly at the woman who looked her way. She noticed the woman drop something, but couldn't tell what it was right away. Yujin called out to them, asking them to wait. The couple looked confused. They didn't know her. Yujin picked up an earring from the floor and handed it to the woman, explaining she had dropped it. The woman looked surprised. It was a gift for her wedding anniversary. She was so grateful Yujin had noticed and returned it. Overjoyed, the woman hugged Yujin and thanked her. They wished each other luck and a wonderful evening. As the woman kept thanking her, Yujin smiled politely, happy she could help such a lovely person. While Yujin was saying goodbye, the elevator doors closed and Tayo went up to their floor, leaving her behind. Jin Tayo, that idiot! Yujin fumed. He just left me here without even saying a word. Was it really that hard to wait 10 seconds? Where are the ghosts when you actually need them to drag him away? As Yujin stood there fuming, the couple she'd helped earlier watched her with amused curiosity, listening to her creative string of insults. She eventually returned to the room alone. Tayo wasn't there, so she flopped down on the couch to rest for a bit. It felt strange to do nothing, and the longer she rested, the less she felt like doing anything at all. Then she heard Tayo return, surprisingly soon. The man asked what she was doing. Was this really the first time she wasn't bothering anyone and just lazing around? Without even sitting up, Yujin asked how many times a day he trained. To her, that level of discipline seemed almost pathological. Tayo thought maybe she should try a few exercises herself. Staying fit never hurts. Yujin refused, saying she was busy doing her own circulation exercises. She felt tightness in her chest and suspected her growing irritation might be a symptom of something serious, so she was doing her own version of therapy. Tayo didn't say anything, just gave a cocky smile and decided not to interrupt her healing routine. On TV, there was a report about Naval Commander Lee Byung-gun being appointed as the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Yujin perked up. Could it be the same commander? Maybe Tayo should hear this. It was only the second time in history that a naval officer had taken that role. The announcer called it a revolutionary break from military hierarchy, and that man was Lee Jong-young's father. As chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he now commanded the army, the navy, and everything else. Yujin was stunned. She thought he was just a regular officer. She had no idea he was such a high-ranking figure. She turned to Tayo, saying it was already dinner time. They should go eat. The man put aside his work, and they decided not to be late for dinner. When they entered the restaurant, Yujin noticed the same couple from the elevator sitting at one of the tables. It really was that same sweet woman. She recognized Yujin right away, and the girl couldn't help but greet her again. The lady invited Yujin and Tayo to join them for dinner so they could get to know each other better. While Yujin was thinking of a polite way to refuse, Tayo said yes immediately, agreeing with a straight face. Yujin stared at him in disbelief. She hadn't expected that at all. The lady still couldn't stop thanking Yujin for finding her earring. It meant a lot to her sentimentally. The man introduced himself as Samuel Britton, but said to just call him Sam. His wife was Emily Britton, or simply Emily as she insisted. Tayo introduced himself first. Surprisingly polite tonight, not his usual self at all. Yujin smiled and said her name was Crystal. She didn't even know why, it just slipped out. Tayo looked at her in surprise, but Yujin had no idea how to explain. He asked since when she'd changed her name to Crystal. Did she like it better than her real one? Yujin put on a mysterious face and said proudly that it was her English name. Tayo remembered her saying she had never traveled abroad, and that was true. He couldn't understand why she'd suddenly need an English name if she'd never used one before. Annoyed, Yujin snapped that you didn't have to go abroad to have an English name. Then she turned back to Emily and said, "Actually, I'm Seo Yujin, but you can just call me Yujin." The lady smiled and said it was lovely to meet such a charming young woman. Dinner was delicious, and the friendly conversation made the evening even better. Sam asked if they were dating. They looked so good together. Or maybe even married like him and Emily? Yujin froze. She didn't know how to respond or what to say. Just as she was about to clarify that they were just acquaintances, Tayo cut in and said, "We're dating." Yujin felt a strange mix of surprise and warmth, but also panic. She lightly kicked him under the table, whispering, "What are you talking about?" She couldn't understand why he was acting so weird tonight. She wondered why he said that. Could it be that he'd developed feelings she didn't even realize existed? But she was sure that couldn't be true. It was simply impossible. Sam reacted cheerfully to their answer. They reminded him of the good old days. Curious, he asked what exactly attracted him to Yujin. What was so special about her that made their relationship begin? Tayo wasn't prepared for that question, but his improvisation saved him. He said he liked it when she always had the last word. Yujin was annoyed. She didn't like that Tayo was saying such nonsense without even asking her opinion. She couldn't recall him ever liking when she had the last word. To keep the conversation going, Tayo asked Sam which country they were from. The woman explained that Sam had worked in a bank until he retired last year. This year, they decided to take a vacation trip for their 30th anniversary. Tayo thought this trip must be really special for them. He could hardly believe that at their age, they still enjoyed spending time together and traveling abroad. Watching Tayo, Yujin couldn't believe it. Was Mr. Jin always this polite? And she just never noticed? Dinner was pleasant, but something strange was happening with Yujin. She figured she probably had one drink too many and was a little tipsy. She didn't feel well and could barely keep up with Tayo, afraid of being left behind again like last time. Because of her intoxication, Yujin's legs felt heavy, stumbling over each other as she tried to stay upright. But she didn't manage to. She tripped and started falling right onto Tayo's back. He turned just in time, caught her in his arms, and saved her from hitting the floor. He asked if she was okay, but when she leaned against his chest, all she could notice was how unbuttoned his shirt was. She tried not to think about it and quickly moved her head away, turning to the side. But Tayo held her gently by the head, pulling her closer as if to show an elderly couple how lovingly he could hold her. Seeing that scene, the woman smiled. What a caring young man he was, and how sweet it looked from the outside. Standing in Tayo's arms, all Yujin could hear was the sound of his heartbeat. Fast, nervous. For some reason, it felt calming to her. She didn't even try to move away from his embrace. When they reached the 39th floor, Sam and his wife got ready to leave since they lived one floor below. Everyone had fun that evening and hoped to see each other again before the couple left the country. Yujin and Tayo stayed in each other's arms, and as Tayo wished them a good night, the elevator doors slowly closed. Once the doors shut, he instantly stepped back and acted as if nothing special had happened. When Yujin asked what that was all about, he pretended not to understand. But she meant, how long had he been in love with her? It was hard to believe. Even if he liked her, shouldn't he have told her before pretending they were a couple? First, confess your feelings. Then act. Tayo didn't answer, only asked, "Do you mean Samuel or Emily?" There was no point in pretending anymore. He must have had a reason for introducing them as lovers. Or maybe he really had fallen for her. Tayo looked at her seriously. Did she really think he was the type to fall in love at first sight? When he saw those people earlier that day, he acted terribly. Or rather, as he usually did. But in the restaurant, he was completely different. He couldn't understand what had come over him, or what he might have done wrong that upset her. Normally, Tayo wasn't the social type. He'd never agree to lunch with strangers, let alone introduce Yujin as his girlfriend. Then Yujin suddenly remembered the email. When Mr. Lee Byung-gun asked Tayo about a call, he said another message was supposed to arrive soon. After that, Tayo started acting strangely, and Yujin assumed it had something to do with that. She wondered what message he had received. Could Sam and Emily be hiding something? Did they do something wrong? Yujin suspected Tayo was keeping secrets from her. But she had to find out. She wanted to help him. Then she saw him smile and rubbed her eyes. It must have been her imagination. Tayo joked that Yujin probably thought of them as spies. She rolled her eyes. Another one of his ridiculous jokes. Those two didn't look like spies at all. Tayo asked what she thought spies looked like. Not everyone wore masks and carried guns after all. To Yujin, spies looked suspicious and overly clever, especially their eyes always scanning everything like they were gathering intel. But these people looked like ordinary tourists. There was no reason to accuse innocent people. Usher Patterson, born in 1962, 10 years in U.S. military intelligence, known for stealing classified secrets from multiple countries. Still, Yujin couldn't imagine what kind of secret information Sam could possibly steal from Korea. Tayo explained that after the U.S. lifted restrictions on Korean missile development, Korea could now build intercontinental and mid-range missiles. Naturally, others would want to know where Korean weapons technology was going. To China, Japan, the US, or somewhere else. Yujin realized how serious this was. Shouldn't Tayo arrest him immediately? But rash actions without proof could spark diplomatic trouble. They first needed to uncover what data leaked, and who the final traitor was. It was pointless to break a jar leaking from the inside. Time and patience were needed to find the truth. Of course, they had to be careful. That arrogant American fool had taken money for dirty work. She herself would never do something like that, no matter the reward. This time, a simple broken arms wouldn't be enough. Tayo noticed how fiercely Yujin reacted. She wasn't afraid of anything. But why would such a politically delicate and dangerous mission be assigned to Tayo specifically? Maybe because higher-ups needed a civilian to take the blame if things went wrong. Yujin wasn't far from the truth. She asked why he'd accept such a mission knowing the risks. Tayo saw that Yujin was upset and asked what exactly bothered her so much. Was he pretending to hate the world yet still let others treat him like a fool? And he was asking her why that annoyed her? That's exactly why he asked. Yujin wasn't his girlfriend, yet she worried and got angry like she was hoping for something more. Sure, she wasn't his girlfriend, but anyone in her place would be angry. It was dangerous and could cost someone their life. Tayo couldn't tell. Was she worried for him or for the fact that staying by his side put her in danger too? The look on Tayo's face made Yujin think he didn't understand her at all. So she asked about the rumor she'd heard, that he once hit his superior officer. Mr. Lee Byung-gun mentioned that Tayo had punched the superior after he nearly sent an entire squad to their deaths. Tayo didn't want to recall that incident, let alone explain it to a civilian girl who knew nothing about military life. Still, he tried to explain simply. There were plenty of idiots with inferiority complexes unfit to lead, but you meet them everywhere. He'd realized just how many fools exist in this world, especially in the army. Yujin remembered the law of weirdos. Wherever you go, they're always there. But the scariest part? If you don't see any weirdos around, it probably means you're the weirdo. Luckily, Tayo had plenty of them nearby, meaning he wasn't the strangest one around. Tayo raised an eyebrow. By her logic, one of them had to be the weirdo. If she said it wasn't him, then who was? Yujin smirked, saying she knew exactly who the weirdo was. Him, the crazy one. Looking at their interaction, they both acted weird, blamed each other, and tried to prove the opposite. For the second time, Yujin noticed Tayo smiling. Was he finally getting used to civilian life? Maybe even learning to express emotions? When he smiled, he looked completely different, like someone who hadn't killed countless people as a soldier. But how could he smile so sweetly now when he'd agreed to a mission that could cost both their lives? Even if he wasn't scared, for the first time Yujin wanted to quit everything. Even the money she'd planned to earn through him. The day started with breakfast, and Yujin, heading to the cafe, wanted to eat her favorite dish again. And why not do it today? Enjoying a mango bingsu and being happy all day, that was something she just couldn't give up. Unless something truly irreversible happened. Yujin thought that if she kept eating this expensive dessert every day until her contract ended, and paying with the black card, it would probably cost her an entire year's salary. She decided that from this moment on, she'd have one mango bingsu every single day. Even if she froze to death, she wouldn't give up this pleasure. Tayo looked at Yujin and said her acting club skills would soon come in handy, though she was still just a beginner. The girl sighed bitterly. Did he come up with something again? Would she have to improvise, even though she wasn't ready for it at all? Tayo had some business to take care of, and he needed Yujin's help. Right now, she could really assist him with something important. Even though she didn't want to, she gathered her courage and asked what exactly he needed her to do. When they entered the restaurant, Tayo pointed at a couple sitting at the table and told her that today she'd be working with them. From the outside, the couple looked so sweet. They didn't look like spies at all, contrary to what Teo had told her. Her mission was to stall them for 15 minutes. All she had to do was make sure they didn't return to their hotel room. Yujin understood her task, but she wanted to know what Teo would be doing in the meantime. Would he really leave her alone with them? The man looked at Yujin and asked if she really wanted to know what he'd be doing. She got the message and decided not to ask further. As he walked away, Yujin called after him that he had exactly 15 minutes, not a second more, so he'd better make it in time. Yujin thought that money was her greatest enemy. Because of it, she had to take risks and follow Teo's every instruction. She gathered her courage, walked up to the suspicious couple, and called out to them. She noticed that Sam and his wife were already about to leave. She had to hurry. They were heading back to their room, and Sam completely agreed with his wife's suggestion. Emily was startled when Yujin suddenly jumped on her shoulder, shouting frantically, her face full of panic and worry. Yujin tried her best to squeeze out some tears, thinking to herself that Teo really owed her big time for this. It was much harder than it looked. Meanwhile, Teo had already met with the person who was supposed to help him. He asked Kim Il-deok which room Samuel and Emily Britton were staying in. The man replied, "Room." Teo extended his hand, demanding the key to their room in a firm, commanding tone. "And don't tell them a thing," Tao added. The man hesitated, realizing he was about to commit an official offense. With a heavy heart, the man agreed to give Teo the key, convincing himself it was for the good of public safety. Teo assured him that this action was a matter of national security and thanked him for understanding. Mr. Kim handed him this key, warning Teo to be careful, even though this wasn't part of his duties. Teo entered the elevator and went up to the 40th floor. He had to make it look natural, to avoid suspicion. Then, using the key, he unlocked a stairway door that would take him down to the 39th floor. As he descended, he mentally prepared for the mission. He put on gloves. He couldn't afford to leave a single fingerprint behind. He was almost at their room, but needed to make sure no one was on the floor. He couldn't risk being caught breaking in. He quickly unlocked the door, knowing he didn't have much time to find something useful. Once inside, he began carefully scanning the room. Anything suspicious had to be photographed or memorized. He only had 10 minutes left. First, he checked the bedroom. The couple's belongings were scattered all over the bed as if they had packed in a hurry. On the desk, Teo spotted a notebook. He immediately went over to check all of Sam's notes. Nothing interesting. Not wanting to waste time, he moved on. Then he noticed a laptop. Surely there must be something valuable inside. But time was running out. Opening it, he realized it was password protected. He tried several combinations, but nothing worked. That's when his backup plan came in handy. The screwdriver he'd brought with him. Unscrewing the back panel, he used a knife to carefully remove the chip and memory unit. It seemed like he'd done it, but he had only a few seconds left to sneak out unseen and return to the restaurant. Yujin played her part perfectly, keeping Sam and his wife occupied. Emily asked her what happened and why she was crying. Yujin said she had heard it was their wedding anniversary this year, and asked how long they'd been married and whether they'd ever thought about divorce. Emily didn't want to talk. She assumed Yujin had just had a fight with her boyfriend, Teo. If only it were just a fight, Yujin said bitterly. It's much worse than that. Her mother had warned her that people never change, but she didn't listen. Sam tried to comfort her, saying that arguments were normal for couples. They fought, made up, and fell in love again. But this wasn't just any fight. Their personalities were completely incompatible. Teo thought being rich was the only thing that mattered. On top of that, Teo wasn't very attentive. If she didn't speak first, he wouldn't even say a word. And that drove her insane. Lately, she hadn't been able to sleep well because of him, and every morning she looked exhausted, her face pale and weary. And when she complained about her back and neck hurting, he didn't even care to listen. Teo was always full of energy. It just wasn't fair. The Brittons listened carefully, shocked that such things were happening between them. They had thought the couple was happy. Then Sam suggested, "Why don't you just leave him?" Yujin thought about it. It sounded simple, but in reality, it wasn't. Still, she reminded herself, this job pays well. Yujin noticed the woman kept glancing around as if she was in a hurry, so she tried harder to hold her attention. Finally, Emily stood up, apologizing. They had plans to visit the museum, and their taxi was already waiting. They needed to get ready and leave. Yujin didn't know what to do. Teo still hadn't returned. What was taking him so long? She caught up with Sam and Emily near the elevator, asking if they could stay just a little longer, maybe have another drink and talk a bit more. When Yujin offered to pay, Sam seemed a little intrigued. The girl still had a lot more stories about Tayo to tell. Yujin begged Emily to listen to her, saying she was going through a really hard time. But Emily was unmoved. She had already decided to leave. This is bad, Yujin thought. If they caught Tayo in their room, things could go terribly wrong. She didn't even want to imagine how. Maybe she looked suspicious, because Sam and Emily were eyeing her like she was hiding something. If this kept up, Tayo wouldn't just end up in the local news. He'd be all over the headlines. Yujin had no idea what to do. Her heart raced as the elevator doors opened. It was now or never. It would all be over if they caught Tayo in their room. She felt like they kept staring at her, as if they suspected something. Yujin closed her eyes so she wouldn't have to see anything, bracing herself for the worst she could imagine. When the door opened, she saw Tayo smiling, saying he had finally found her. He'd been looking all over the hotel. He looked as calm as ever, and from his expression, it was clear he had finished his work right on time. He apologized to Sam, saying it seemed Yujin had slightly interrupted them. Then he added that she could be a little persistent sometimes. It took time to listen to her. Sam smiled and said it was fine. Young lovers always had a lot to talk about. Times change, but some things never do. Emily wanted Tayo to notice how sad Yujin looked. She advised him to be diligent not only at night, but also during the day. The elevator doors closed, and Sam and Emily went up to their room, leaving Tayo and Yujin downstairs. The girl held herself together, but when the couple left, she collapsed to her knees. Finally, she could breathe and stop pretending to be a victim. Tayo was pleased with how well she'd done her job. Yujin was pleasantly surprised. Had Jin Tayo actually praised her? He'd never been good at showing emotion or gratitude. Watching her kneel before him, Tayo reached out his hand to help her stand up. Seo Yujin couldn't believe her eyes. Did the sun rise from the west today? What had gotten into him? She couldn't deny she liked it. She accepted his help and thanked him for his thoughtfulness. She couldn't believe she'd lived to hear this beast-like man tell her she'd done a good job. He had finally acknowledged her, but Tayo told her to keep her composure. Otherwise, she might ruin the mission. Yujin admitted her mistake and promised to be more restrained and keep her emotions in check. Later, sitting in the car, Tayo grew angry. He couldn't understand why Yujin had only now told him that Sam and Emily went out. She apologized, saying she was so out of it. They had been waiting near the hotel for Sam and Emily for some time. Tayo asked if she had overheard why they were leaving. The girl remembered Emily mentioning they'd called a taxi that would arrive soon, so they needed to hurry. Moments later, the taxi really did pull up in front of the hotel. The taxi stopped at the entrance. Someone was waiting for it. They assumed it was for Sam and his wife. When Sam and Emily exited the hotel, they got into the taxi, but where they were headed was unknown. Tayo immediately ordered Yujin to follow them. She understood, but worried they might notice her. Since the target was in clear view, Yujin had to keep her distance and not get too close. If they followed too obviously, they'd be spotted right away. She had to think a few steps ahead, ready to switch lanes whenever necessary. Yujin recalled she'd never told him that back in college. She'd worked part-time. Once, she even tailed a couple having an affair and took pictures of them. She mentioned it so he wouldn't think she was a total amateur at tracking. Tayo grew curious. Why had she worked so many part-time jobs? Was she planning to get rich and powerful? He was joking again. In reality, everything she earned went to paying off her father's debts. Tayo hadn't known she had such heavy debts. Yujin clarified they weren't hers, but she was still responsible for them. If not for that, she wouldn't have been babysitting him. She added sarcastically that thanks to that debt, she'd had the honor of meeting him. Now she was basically a volunteer working for her country's good. Tayo reminded her that her volunteer job actually paid much better than expected. Yujin didn't like him rubbing it in. Maybe it sounded strange, but did he really think it was easy to find someone as skilled as her? Most people specialized in one area. Versatile workers like her were rare. He thought it was rather impolite of her to brag like that. Yujin thought to herself that he'd better watch his back. One day, someone might stab him there. They'd been driving for a long time, starting to think the taxi would never stop. Finally, it arrived at its destination. Emily stepped out of the car, but they couldn't figure out where she was going. The only nearby place was a store. If they were sightseeing, they wouldn't split up. That would be strange. Yujin asked if she should follow Emily while Tayo kept an eye on Sam. Tayo thought for a moment, then decided they should keep following the taxi. Emily wouldn't get far. They were surprised when the taxi arrived at Hangang, the Citizen Central Park. It was a well-known dock area, but they had no idea what Sam was doing there. Was he planning to board a cruise ship? And why alone? Wasn't his wife joining him? Yujin immediately wondered if they'd have to follow him onto the cruise ship too. That was the last thing she wanted. She wasn't prepared for a trip. Once they boarded the ship, they had to find a good spot to discreetly watch Sam. Sam went inside and took a seat with a clear view. Tayo decided to stand by the door so he could hide quickly if needed. Suddenly, Yujin felt unwell and couldn't continue the surveillance. Tayo had suspected this might happen, so he was ready for any situation. Sometimes plans had to change. Yujin was in pain and wanted Tayo to notice and help her, but he just stood nearby, not realizing she needed care right now. All he said was that she shouldn't keep telling him no one more qualified existed than her. Yujin didn't care. She just wanted a sip of water. Tayo thought the girl was something else, but not exactly a real professional. After a few sips of water, she felt better. She could live again. But today had been a total waste of time. She thought they were going sightseeing, nothing more. After a moment of thought, Tayo asked if it was happening today. Yujin didn't understand what he meant, so she asked, 2 nights ago, data about a missile had been deleted from the defense agency's system. It was disguised as an external hack, but Tayo was certain the attack came from the inside. He figured the culprit would try to deliver the data as soon as possible. Keeping it would only make things worse. But Yujin knew that Sam had been in the hotel all day yesterday, under heavy surveillance, so the chance the informant came there was slim. Then it had to be today. But Sam hadn't met anyone. Maybe the meeting was set for tomorrow. They'd wait a bit longer. Meanwhile, Tayo decided to go train. Yujin didn't want him to go. As she'd said before, he was addicted to training. He asked why she thought that, but if she wanted him to stay, he could follow Emily's advice instead and train hard with the girl during the day. You could always train hard during the day to keep your mind off nonsense, and your body wouldn't ache. After all, that kind of thing could be done not only at night, and no one ever complained of sore backs or necks afterward. Yujin didn't like his jokes and shoved Tayo toward the door, urging him to just go train already. But Tayo was genuinely curious about what kind of intensive activity she thought he did at night. Yujin's phone buzzed with a message. Someone asked if she and Tayo were on a cruise together, and since when had they gotten so close? Jean Seoryong added that, for the record, she didn't approve of their relationship. Yujin should know she cared for her, and Tayo wasn't the right guy. The girl heard footsteps approaching, so she quickly ended the conversation with her CEO. She didn't understand what that was about, but one thing was certain. She definitely wasn't going to date him. The footsteps stopped by her door. Then there was silence. She was exhausted and just wanted to sleep. Yujin lay down on the couch and didn't even notice when she drifted into a deep sleep. The man stood outside her door. All he had to do was press the bell so she'd let him in. The sound was unbearable, the most annoying she'd ever heard, and he kept his finger on the bell for far too long. This is ridiculous, Yujin thought. She was too tired to get up. She'd thought Tayo went to train. Why was he back so soon? She silently begged him to let her sleep a bit longer, then reluctantly got to her feet to open the door. Yujin opened the door, saying, "What kind of training only lasts 10 minutes?" But then she froze in shock. What she saw didn't surprise her, but what she heard next did. A hotel employee was standing by the door, holding something in his hands. He handed Yujin a small box with medicine. Medicine? Yujin was puzzled. The employee explained that the man she had been with that morning had asked him to give her something for motion sickness. She really didn't expect that from Tayo. But the medicine would actually come in handy the next time she had to board a cruise ship. She repeated to herself several times that it was just motion sickness medicine, but she still couldn't wrap her head around the fact that Tayo had thought of it. After all, maybe he wasn't such a bad guy, though his military service must have messed him up, because they definitely don't teach that there. It was still early, but they had to be near the hotel already to keep watch and make sure they didn't miss when Sam or his wife went out. Waking up that early was tough, so while sitting on the bench, they didn't even feel like talking. They just watched from afar as Sam and Emily drank their morning coffee at the restaurant. It was a shame they couldn't hear what the two were talking about. Tayo, as always, was serious and focused. He tried not to get distracted so he wouldn't miss anything important. Yujin couldn't help but think that now, whenever she saw him, he bothered her even more. And there was nothing she could do about it. That morning, something happened that Yujin would remember for a long time. She knocked on the man's door to tell him he had a phone call. She figured if someone was calling him that early, it must be important. But when he opened the door, she froze and couldn't say a word. It was the first time she'd seen Tayo shirtless, and she was completely taken aback. Without clothes, he looked even more handsome, and she felt a bit embarrassed staring at him. He took the phone and answered the call right there, even though Yujin was standing beside him, unable to look away. She had no idea how to react. Seeing him like that, fresh out of the shower, left a mark she couldn't forget. She could tell even in the elevator, he really was a soldier, built to survive anything. But Tayo noticed her strange gaze and asked why she was looking at him like that. "Didn't you realize you were practically eating me up with your eyes?" he teased. Yujin didn't know what to say, though she thought to herself, "Not all of you, just your abs." Yujin figured there was no need to worry anymore, since after their last trip to Hangang, Sam hadn't left the hotel room. Maybe their meeting had already happened. Tayo didn't like that Yujin made such predictions. It wasn't her place to decide whether he had failed a mission or not. He assured her he had never failed a mission in his life, and this time would be no different, even if some girl kept doubting him. When Yujin said she completely agreed with him, Tayo got irritated and told her never to just agree with him. He hated that. While they watched, Yujin wanted to understand the terms of their contract. At first, it only described secretarial duties, but at what point did it go far beyond that? It might have looked like she was relaxing, but in reality, Yujin was in danger. Had she forgotten that she'd been bored in the hotel room for days, barely going out, and surviving on one mango bingsu a day? There was even a time when he personally drove the car while performing her duties. Maybe it wasn't her who had spent the whole day in bed, skipping breakfast, lunch, and dinner, just because she still felt sick from the last trip. Maybe her salary should be reduced because she hasn't been working as much as before. Yujin agreed. That had never happened before. The contract clearly stated she shouldn't talk too much, but follow his orders and requests. So now, she had to get back to her direct duties. She had to prepare the car immediately. They were heading out soon. Sam and Emily had finished breakfast, and a taxi was already waiting for them outside the hotel. They were definitely going somewhere. Once the couple got into the car, Tayo and Yujin followed them again. This time, they planned to act differently, and hoped for better results. Yujin wanted to know if Sam and Emily were really a married couple, but Tayo didn't have enough info about Emily. She might have just been a civilian contact. Yujin thought Emily seemed to be the one controlling Sam. Could that really happen in an unmarried couple? She meant that it was worth thinking about. Emily always took the lead in their conversations, suggesting when and where they should eat or leave. Tayo found Yujin's words interesting and began to think, could it really be that Emily was the one in charge? It was easy to notice that Emily was going to the store alone today. Yujin was sure she wouldn't take Sam with her. Tayo asked Yujin's opinion. Did she think the room placement was important in this situation? Yujin couldn't understand what Tayo was getting at. Did he really think room placement mattered right now? It's easy to see how that works in society. The position of a desk or bed isn't just for looks. It can reflect someone's status or authority. For example, new employees get desks near the exit, while the higher-ups sit at the far end of the office where they can observe everyone, just like the CEO's office. Some people don't stand out. You only notice them when you pass someone else. It's a subtle way to show status and power. It was the same with them. Tayo's room was in the inner part of the suite, and her was near the door, reflecting their boss-employee dynamic. When Tayo visited their suite, Sam's room was next to the entrance, and Emily's was the farthest away. Yujin added that Tayo's room was bigger than hers. She wasn't complaining. Staying in a luxury suite was still nice. Tayo interrupted her thoughts before she could finish, almost shouting that it looked like he'd made his first mistake. If there really was a hierarchy between them, then Emily must have been above Sam in status. He was frustrated. He could have figured that out earlier and handled the whole operation differently. Now he was absolutely sure. Emily was the one in charge of everything. She was probably the one managing all the deals. When Sam got out of the car, Tayo ordered Yujin to stay put and not make any sudden moves. Yujin stayed in the car, deep in thought, trying to make sense of what Tayo had just said and what he was leading up to. Meanwhile, Emily, like any normal woman, went into a fashion store. At first glance, nothing about her seemed suspicious. She approached a young clerk and asked if he spoke English, even just a little. When he said he understood a bit, she asked him about the quality of the clothes. Tayo watched her closely, trying to move closer to overhear their conversation. The clerk's face looked strangely familiar. He tried to remember where he'd seen him before. Then it hit him. The guy was one of the researchers from the list that had been emailed to him. His name was Baek Sunwoo. Emily thanked the clerk for his help and reached out to shake his hand. Tayo carefully watched her every move. He felt something important was about to happen. During the handshake, Tayo noticed the guy discreetly passing a flash drive to Emily. Tayo put on his gloves, thrilled that they'd finally caught them. It was time to act fast and finish the mission successfully. Emily was pleased with her interaction with Baek Sunwoo. Everything she had planned went smoothly without a single problem. Tayo waited patiently until Baek Sunwoo left the mall and got into his car. Nearby, Yujin was already waiting in her own vehicle. When the guy was just about to drive off, they had to block his way to stop him from leaving the parking lot. But for some reason, he wasn't in a hurry. He sat there with his eyes closed, so overwhelmed with anxiety that he nearly passed out. When he finally started the engine and tried to leave, Baek Sunwoo was convinced that everything was finally over. As soon as he tried to move forward, Yujin's car blocked his way, cutting off the exit. The guy didn't understand what was happening, but looked absolutely terrified. Why the hell was that car stopped in the middle of the road? Didn't the driver realize he was blocking the exit? It seemed like he wasn't planning to go anywhere. Baek Sunwoo got out of his car, apologized politely, and asked the driver to move so he could leave the parking lot. But suddenly, Tayo appeared. He shoved the guy back into the car and slammed the door hard against him. Baek Sunwoo had no idea what was going on, but the pain was sharp and real. He demanded to know what the stranger wanted and how he dared to attack someone in broad daylight. Calling Tayo a lunatic, the guy still couldn't figure out what he wanted. But when he noticed the gloves on Tayo's hands, he realized things were about to get really bad. Tayo received a phone call, some important news that confirmed his suspicions and helped him plan the next stage of the operation. He was told that the Britons had just received the laptop they ordered 2 days ago. Tayo was frustrated. He had tried to delay them, but things hadn't gone as planned. The mission had to be postponed. Yujin called Sam. He immediately asked what was wrong. She never called him. The girl explained she'd heard that he and his wife were planning to leave Korea tomorrow. They'd always been kind to her, so she thought it would be rude not to say goodbye. She'd love to see them tonight. Sam agreed and thanked her for caring. He promised that he and Emily would be there in 30 minutes. Tayo turned to Yujin and asked if she remembered what he had told her earlier. Now it was more important than ever. Yujin felt uneasy but replied that she remembered everything perfectly. Still, she hated seeing that strange man lying on the floor, bound hand and foot. Was all of this really because of that guy? Why make things so complicated just to sell out your own country? He only cared about himself. A real piece of trash. Soon, Yujin heard a knock at the door, and she immediately knew. It was Sam and his wife, Emily. Smiling, she opened the door to greet them, saying how happy she was they'd accepted her invitation. Sam didn't come empty-handed. He brought her a gift. Yujin pretended to be thrilled, insisting it wasn't necessary to go through the trouble. She invited them into the room, trying to recall Tayo's instructions. As soon as she escorted them inside, she was supposed to run, as far and as fast as possible. No matter what happened, she had to follow those orders. Otherwise, things could end badly for both him and her. Under no circumstances was she to let emotions get in the way or worry about him. She had to follow the plan exactly. No sudden moves. Tayo didn't want her hesitating or becoming a burden. He decided to make sure she truly understood. "I understand," she said, though she couldn't hide her emotions. Deep down, she knew he'd never truly worry about her. Tayo waited for a clear confirmation from Yujin. She assured him she understood and would follow his orders exactly. Yujin gestured toward the room, inviting the guests in. Though she was struggling inside, she forced a smile, hiding her anxiety. Sam and Emily politely thanked her for the invitation but asked if Tayo would be joining them for dinner. When they entered the room, they saw Baek Sunwoo lying on the floor, and Tayo standing beside him. That's when they realized everything. Tayo smiled. "Welcome, Emily and Sam," he said. Or should I say, DIA's Natalie Rogers. The DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the U.S. Military Intelligence Organization. Natalie Rogers, Emily's real name. The woman immediately pulled out a gun and aimed it at Tayo. She demanded one thing. "Who the hell are you, Jin Tayo, and who do you really work for?" Tayo remained calm. As he'd said before, he was a nobody, just someone who cared about protecting his country. Emily shouted that she had warned Usher about him. From the start, the guy had seemed suspicious. Sam had lowered his guard, believing Tayo was just the hotel owner's son, never expecting things to turn out like this. Eugene tried to peek inside the room. Did they really not know Tayo had served in the army? That seemed strange. Tayo didn't want to waste time with pointless talk. He needed one thing, the information his client was after. He asked directly where the data the guy had given them was stored. He knew their laptop had crashed, so they hadn't had the chance to send it yet. Sam realized Tayo must have been the one who broke their laptop. It made sense now why it suddenly stopped working. Emily blamed Usher, saying it was his fault. He was always careless at the end of a mission. But Sam disagreed, reminding her it was she who insisted they have dinner with them. Tayo told Emily to come closer. Judging by her age, he doubted she could hit him accurately from that distance. Outraged, she asked if he really thought she was an idiot. He'd just revealed where she came from. She was no rookie. Then she turned to Usher, asking for backup. Eugene secretly watched everything happening in the room. She couldn't imagine how she could possibly help Tayo. Tayo stood in the middle of the room while the furious woman kept him at gunpoint. She could shoot any second, and it would all be over for him. But Eugene had to obey his orders. Then again, if that woman actually shot him, there would be no one left to follow. After thinking for a moment, Eugene decided she had to do something. She slipped her hand into her pocket, searching for anything that could help, or at least give her an idea. What she found might actually work. No one would suspect what she was holding in her hand. She looked at Tayo, silently telling him she wouldn't abandon him. Tayo's eyes warned her not to interfere. It could cost her life. But Eugene chose to ignore his order and follow her instincts instead. She knew he wouldn't approve, but this was her only way to help. Emily had her back turned so Eugene could approach quietly. But she had to be careful not to startle her, or the woman might fire by accident. Eugene threw the keys into the next room to make it seem like someone was there, hoping to distract the woman. Just as Eugene expected, Emily turned toward the sound coming from the other room. Tayo quickly caught on to what Eugene was trying to do. He had to react fast based only on instinct and timing. Emily fired into the other room. The sound was deafening. Eugene ducked for cover, praying the woman wouldn't hit her. Then Emily turned back to Tayo, warning him that her next shot might not miss. And from what he'd seen, her aim was deadly accurate. But Tayo was already determined, so he immediately lunged at Emily, aiming to knock the gun out of her hands while she was distracted. He needed to make her lose balance, so he punched Emily, not caring at all that she was a woman. Sam saw Tayo hit Emily and quickly rushed to help her. Calling Tayo a freak, he jumped into the fight. Tayo noticed Sam approaching, so he quickly grabbed his gun and aimed it at him, warning him to stay still and make no sudden moves. Sam was furious. They hadn't expected their mission to end in such a disastrous way. But who knew it would work? The rule about not hitting women or children had been broken, and now they had to do exactly what Jin Tayo asked. Eugene tried to slip out of the room unnoticed, moving quietly to avoid drawing attention. She carefully closed the door behind her and hurried away. Time was short, so there was no room for emotions or hesitation. She ran faster than she had in a long time. She assumed nothing major would happen while she was gone, but she had to hurry. Running down the long corridor, she suddenly ran into them and was surprised. It all happened faster than she expected. Eugene immediately realized that Tayo had a solid chance to finish the mission successfully, without risking his life. Tayo kept Sam at gunpoint, determined to find out who had hired them, insisting they answer right now. Emily smiled at how cute the question was, one they hadn't even planned to answer. She was sure Tayo already knew. Tayo, however, was persistent. He didn't like repeating himself, but if necessary, he would keep going until he got the answer. It seemed they still didn't understand him, so he hid the gun behind his back and decided to explain everything in detail. He decided to deal with Sam first. Fighting a man was far more satisfying than a weak woman. Tayo understood Sam's intent, so Sam immediately lunged at him with fists. Though Sam was much older, he relied on his past training to give him an edge. Sam grabbed Tayo's legs, trying to pin him to the floor and stay on top. Tayo hadn't expected Sam to be that strong, so he didn't react in time to the attack. Before he knew it, Sam was on top and swinging a punch at him. Tayo grabbed Sam's arm firmly. Sam was really strong, and Tayo didn't try to go easy on him. Sitting on top, Sam tried to hit the guy in the face. Tayo focused on overpowering him, losing sight of Emily entirely. When he saw Emily approaching, it was too late to avoid her attack. She moved quickly and smashed a large flower vase on Tayo's head. The vase shattered, sending shards flying across the room. Emily was trying to help Sam, but even after the blow, Tayo held his ground, refusing to give in. Sam wasn't as young, and his endurance was lower than Tayo's. After a while, his strength waned, and he realized he had to act faster. Tayo despised people like Sam and Emily. If it were up to him, he'd destroy them to stop them from spreading harm and negativity. He considered them idiots who never understood the first time, forcing him to repeat himself many times. Tayo noticed Sam's hands starting to shake, so it was time to take control and switch positions. He grabbed Sam's head with his legs, immobilizing him and preventing any sudden moves. Tayo squeezed Sam's head so tightly it was hard for him to breathe. Sam coughed violently, but he didn't ease up. Emily realized Sam needed help and tried to approach Tayo, but he kept her at gunpoint, not letting her get close. He ordered her to stay still, warning he could shoot, and he was confident the shot would hit. Tayo had a head wound, blood streaming down his face. But he held Sam on one side and kept Emily at gunpoint on the other. Emily saw Sam suffering and yelled at Tayo to stop pressing him. Sam was completely exhausted, barely breathing. But to release him, Tayo required just one answer. But Sam stayed silent. Emily was furious, but Tayo asked again for their employer's name. She had to answer quickly, even though she didn't want to. Tayo laid out two options. If Emily gave the name, she'd live. If not, she'd face instant death. But Emily felt he should know that revealing their client meant quitting her service. Tayo thought she was already close to retirement, so losing her job was better than losing her life. All he wanted was to know who was after South Korea's military research. As expected, Emily was tough and had no intention of revealing names, even at gunpoint. The door opened and Yujin entered, asking Tayo if it was all over. She noticed the blood on his face and worried about his condition. His wound wasn't serious. Tayo asked Yujin if she had done what he asked earlier. When Yujin smiled, it meant she'd succeeded. She completed her task quickly and efficiently. Yujin held a flash drive and told Emily not to set her wedding date as the password on her laptop. Emily was furious. How could this insignificant girl have guessed her laptop password, especially since no one knew her wedding date? These were Tayo's instructions, which Yujin memorized carefully. First, she had to escort Emily and Sam to the room, then flee immediately. This showed that Tayo worried about her, insisting she avoid the room during the capture of dangerous criminals. Tayo didn't want her lingering and causing complications. After that, she needed to find the flash drive in Emily's room. That was the most important thing Yujin had to do, and she also brought in the guests who were looking for Tayo. Emily hadn't expected them to appear so quickly, and when she saw them, she realized it was over for them. Special forces had been notified about the dangerous criminals threatening their country with secret data leaks for profit. Yujin felt satisfied that she had contributed to this complex mission and helped defeat the criminal. Emily and her accomplices were under the special unit's watch, and it seemed it was all over for them. Emily still couldn't believe she hadn't realized right away that Tayo was actually a soldier, highly trained for operations like this. They put handcuffs on her, yet she kept threatening them, even though she knew there was nothing she could do. How could she have underestimated Tayo's ability to quickly figure out the real criminal and outsmart him? At first glance, it was clear Tayo and the soldiers were colleagues, so Yujin pointed them the way and even opened the door. Tayo looked at Yujin, wanting to make sure she was unharmed, since the criminals might have hurt her too. Yujin was busy looking for the flash drive, so she didn't have time to linger near the criminals. She was surprised by the sudden concern for her. She stood close to Tayo, but he was studying her carefully, as if inspecting her from head to toe. Yujin felt a little uneasy. Why was he looking at her like that? His gaze made her slightly embarrassed. She knew it wasn't the time to worry about herself. He was far worse off, so she needed to give him first aid quickly. The girl noticed that despite his injuries, Tayo acted like nothing happened, not even acknowledging the blood running down his face. The soldier smiled and said to Tayo that he was just like before. Yujin was surprised when the soldier called Tayo Hyungnim. Tayo smiled. Nobody had called him that in a long time, and it felt good to hear it again. The soldier smiled too, clearly happy to see Tayo and missing him. The man addressed Sergeant Kang Sang-yun, asking what he was doing here. Then he noticed the guy had very long hair. The sergeant had heard that Teo had been discharged. He also knew civilians sometimes used brotherly terms socially. And the long hair? He'd grown it specifically for a recent special operation. When Teo threw the gun to the sergeant, the guy panicked. He nearly got shot. As expected, the guy's skills hadn't diminished at all after leaving the service. But right now, Teo was worried. They still hadn't revealed the client's name. Everything else could be handled by the soldiers. They could take over getting info from the criminals. Teo wasn't okay with that. He barked at the sergeant to shut up and disappeared from sight. The soldiers didn't object, deciding to leave. They still had a lot to do. One soldier approached Teo, saying he didn't expect to run into him here. He promised to come back later, since meeting Teo was a dream of his. Then he also said that he was glad to meet Seo Yujin and called her sister-in-law. Yujin was surprised when she heard the word sister-in-law, having no idea why that guy called her like that. Did he really think she was dating Teo? After everything, the maid was cleaning the room and Yujin wandered nearby, unsure how to spend her free time. She felt bad for knocking over a bottle. The maid didn't think it was a big deal, just warned her to be more careful. Yujin needed to talk to Teo, so she went to his room and knocked on the door. She thought he should learn to answer when someone calls him, or maybe he was obsessed with a ghost who died from talking too much. She remembered him asking how she was doing, if she'd hurt herself anywhere. Sometimes he could be caring, but mostly he was unbearable. Sure, he was a jerk, but not enough to be haunted by ghosts. Without waiting for an answer, Yujin decided to enter Teo's room. Opening the door, she saw he wasn't there. She wondered where he went. She was sure she'd seen him enter earlier. She got scared when Teo suddenly appeared behind her, coming out of the bathroom. He wondered who allowed her to enter his room without permission, and then pretend to be scared when she saw him like that. Yujin didn't understand why he was always half-dressed whenever she entered. But looking closely, he really did look like a work of art. His sculpted, muscular body captivated Yujin. She couldn't look away. It felt unfair and cruel, using the situation when his body looked like a true sculpture. She also wouldn't want to wear clothes if she had a body like his. Yujin thought she'd show it off too, but wouldn't forbid others from looking. Teo noticed Yujin staring again and asked why she wouldn't stop ogling him. She was staring at him again. The girl denied staring, and even if she did, she didn't see anything wrong with it. She wanted to treat Teo's wounds, so she brought a first aid kit. She offered for him to sit on the couch without arguing. Teo asked why she was doing this. He hadn't asked for it. In the army, he'd had many injuries and was used to ignoring them. Didn't he even notice the blood running down his head? He needed to clean the wounds and cover them with a bandage. She wondered why he was so stubborn. Was he afraid it would hurt? Why did she have to persuade him like a child? His stubbornness was incredible, even despite his injuries. Did he think she was doing it just because she cared? What if his wounds got infected? He could be unlucky and even end up with tetanus. Who would have to treat him? It could become her hard work. So why not just sit and let her do what needed to be done instead of pointless stubbornness? Teo didn't know Yujin thought he was stubborn. He thought he was acting normally, just not causing her extra trouble. Better tell him to finish his doubts and sit on the couch already. She was tired of waiting. Yujin took a piece of cotton soaked in antiseptic with tweezers and treated the wound, warning it might sting a little. Teo sat calmly while Yujin continued treating the wound. It was unusual for him that someone was trying to help ease his pain. He stayed brave, not flinching once. Yujin was able to treat the wound quickly and efficiently. She knew it was painful, but from Teo's appearance, it seemed he had a very high pain tolerance. He barely reacted to the injury. Yujin didn't like that her actions caused someone pain, but she knew Teo's wounds had to be treated, and she was confident she could handle it. He acted as if he didn't feel any pain at all, sitting calmly, barely moving. A faint smile on his face gave her confidence that she was doing everything right. Yujin saw that his wound looked really bad, but Teo remained calm. She, on the other hand, looked as if she were hurt more than him. Just watching him was painful. How had he managed to take a shower with such an injury when the wound should have been treated first? Could it be that he expected Yujin to demand extra payment for ending up in the hospital? Taking care of a sick person wasn't easy, and she already had too much on her plate. Teo didn't consider his injury critical, so he couldn't understand why Yujin was dramatizing and complicating the situation. She realized her explanation needed elaboration for Teo, because he couldn't grasp the seriousness of the situation on his own. What the hell? Yujin didn't understand why he was staring at her so strangely again. Tayo reacted calmly to everything happening in his life, accepting situations as they were and understanding that he couldn't change them. Even though they were in the same story, their life approaches were different. Yujin aimed to earn a big salary for her work, while Tayo was just fulfilling his duty. She wondered why he was looking at her without saying a word. Had she done something wrong, or did he want to ask her something? Tayo felt as if he could hear his own heartbeat, and it unsettled him. Yujin had carefully treated the wound, only the bandage was left to apply. But his gaze distracted her. Yujin felt the same way. Her heart was racing, and she worried Tayo might hear it. He noticed her discomfort, so he turned away to hide his own embarrassment from her. Yujin applied the bandage and lightly pressed to make sure it wouldn't come off anytime soon. That was it. She had done her job perfectly, treating the wound carefully and applying the bandage without causing him any discomfort or pain. She wanted to make sure he was fine and no longer in pain, but Tayo chose not to respond. After all, he was a soldier, not a little child. He thought if his bones weren't broken and his organs were intact, why was she so worried? Did he need to break a bone or damage an organ to feel pain? Did he really think a deep cut was insignificant? Why couldn't she worry about a serious injury? He noticed Yujin starting to get nervous and tried to explain that he didn't mean it that way at all. As always, these two just couldn't understand each other. Their perspectives were so different, they perceived situations completely differently. He was fine, even when he had been shot or hit by shrapnel in the back. That's why he wanted to show that a cut like this was almost nothing to him. His body was used to it, so he barely felt the pain. When Yujin looked at Tayo's back, she was shocked. There were countless scars, impossible to even count. She saw all this damage, but couldn't understand why he didn't care for his own body and let it get into such a state. How hard must his life on the battlefield have been if he ended up like this? He must have endured terrible moments he didn't want to talk about. Yujin finished treating Tayo, quickly packed up the first aid kit, and decided to go to her room. But before leaving, she told him he had a talent for annoying people with words, so he either needed to stay quiet or go to bed sooner. Tayo found Yujin's advice strange. He didn't understand why she was upset when he was the one injured. Yujin went to her room and slammed the door loudly behind her. It was clear her mood was spoiled. Tayo was left alone and had time to think carefully. Had he really said something that might have upset her? Tayo sat in the living room, reading his book as usual. It was clear he had no plans to do anything else. Yujin wondered if he really planned to stay inside while the weather was perfect outside. A great chance for a walk. Tayo asked where she was planning to go. She didn't think she could sleep yet, so she decided to take a short walk before bed. Tayo wasn't even surprised. She had eaten so much dinner that sleep seemed impossible. Her stomach was probably begging for relief. Did he really plan to scold her for eating? That could lead to more injuries if she got careless. It wasn't about overeating, but about spies and weapons. She was still in shock from everything that had happened. A walk was the best way to calm her thoughts. Tayo thought she was right. A walk was a good idea. Yujin was about to leave when she noticed Tayo had put down his book and was following her. Had he decided to go out too? To avoid being alone in the room? Hadn't she said she was going out to clear her head? Maybe he decided to join her and keep her company. Getting some fresh air before bed was a good idea. Yujin agreed and didn't mind him accompanying her. The evening was really nice. It was quiet and warm, and walking together gave them a chance to talk about various things. Yujin wondered what would happen to the trio they had captured and locked up today. Tayo knew Baek Seon would be sentenced under Korean law, while Natalie and Asher would be deported. Yujin was surprised. These people had tried to steal data about Korea's military projects, but all that awaited them was deportation. She felt they deserved harsher punishment, like solitary confinement and days of hunger. Tayo didn't think they'd be deported without consequence. Such crimes don't go unpunished, and there was clear evidence of their attempt to steal secret information. Once the people behind them were found, they would definitely face full consequences. Yujin didn't understand what Tayo meant by, "they'll get it all." This was already a political matter. Deciding the criminal's fate wasn't his concern. He had done his duty as a soldier, so it wasn't his problem anymore. Truly, such a responsible soldier. So responsible that he even allowed himself to hit his own superior. Tayo didn't want Yujin to comment on his actions toward his superior. She had no right to do so, and she couldn't judge without understanding the situation. Yujin didn't want to criticize his actions, but just to put him in line so he wouldn't think of himself as a superhero. After that, they walked in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. He was naturally quiet, while Yujin's mind was full of different thoughts. Thinking back, it hadn't been long, but considering that her legs were much shorter than his, she couldn't keep up again. The man didn't even consider that she had warned him. When they were together, he should go much slower. At first, when they stepped out, their strides were almost in sync, but then she had to catch up because he walked too fast. This wasn't just a walk anymore, it was a real test. Walking beside him, she trained her legs for endurance. When she pointed it out to him, he tried to adjust to Yujin's pace. She was surprised he reacted reasonably. And what came of it? It turned out he wasn't as bad a man as he tried to appear. Tayo noticed that Yujin kept scratching herself a lot, so he pointed out that if she was itchy, she should take a shower. Yujin protested. That wasn't what he thought, and anyway, she had showered before going on the walk. For the first time in a long while, she tried to be good, but it wasn't working. She barely restrained her anger because she didn't want to ruin things with Tayo. But the man had a real talent for irritating with words. She thought he should protect his back at night, since sudden attacks were possible. Tayo noticed Yujin heading toward the open pool and asked why she was going there. When she realized she'd gone the wrong way, she got even more frustrated. She had planned a calm walk, but that didn't work out in his company. Tayo continued walking beside her, and his question caught Yujin off guard. He wanted to know why she was dissatisfied with his body. He understood that Yujin liked looking at naked men, but she might get caught someday. So if she didn't want trouble, it was better to be satisfied with him. Hearing that, Yujin couldn't hold back her anger. She wanted to say many unpleasant things to him, thinking he was rude and tactless. How did he have the nerve to say that? Everything was completely wrong, and his conclusions and warnings were biased. Tayo walked ahead, and Yujin tried to catch up again. She asked Jin Tayo to wait for her. He misunderstood everything. Because of her anxiety, Yujin could imagine anything. So she stopped for a while, falling far behind Tayo. Had it happened again? Was her imagination running wild? Was her eyesight really getting worse with age? Tayo noticed Yujin had fallen far behind, so he stopped and asked why she had paused and wasn't moving forward. The girl quickened her pace and muttered under her breath that she was walking and there was no need to get annoyed. Addressing Mr. Jin, Yujin thought that Sam probably knew, after checking his biography, that Tayo was the son of the hotel owner. But why? They had no idea that this man was a military soldier. Wasn't that mentioned anywhere? It turned out he served in the UDT's SDS, so this information was classified and unavailable to ordinary people. Yujin didn't understand the abbreviation, so she noted that Tayo was no longer a teenager to be speaking in acronyms. She could only guess what it meant. The girl smiled and said that the abbreviation SDS probably stands for Special Delivery Service. If she misunderstood, couldn't he just explain it to her? Of course, Yujin didn't really know what it meant. She was just joking. There was no need to look at her like that. She expected him to have fun along with her. Maybe it could be decoded as Special Duty Soldier, but she said it was the first thing that came to her mind. To stop Yujin from coming up with too many combinations, he noticed she had plenty. Tayo said it was a Special Duty Squadron. She was happy because she had said almost the same thing. The identities of the brigade members were strictly classified. These were the soldiers who wore masks and didn't have name tags. If a soldier like that died in battle, even their names were erased. They were considered missing in action and could only be identified through DNA. It was sad to learn that soldiers whose names vanished with their deaths were doomed. But why they volunteered for it, Yujin couldn't understand. Volunteering for such a unit was crazy, but why Tayo was there too? Yujin wanted to know. Tayo came from a wealthy family, he had everything. So why did he choose to join that unit? Did he want to become someone who could just disappear into the night, so that in a few years even relatives wouldn't remember him? Yujin waited for his sincere answer. She hoped Tayo could open up and ease his mind. Yujin wondered why his story wasn't publicized in the press, even though he had shown real nobility. But as it turned out, it was confidential information. It seemed Yujin's questions never ended. She kept asking, but he was starting to get annoyed. She had done a lot of work today, work an ordinary person probably couldn't handle, so she could have slept in the bed tonight. But Tayo wanted to tell her about the pay for an underwater demolition officer. Yujin understood and resigned herself to sleeping on the couch. When they entered the hotel, she noticed many people checking in just to relax. But sometimes there wasn't enough space because rooms had to be booked in advance. While they were away, the maids cleaned the room. When they arrived, it was as if nothing had happened. Yujin liked staying at the hotel. Here, she was fed, the room was cleaned, and her laundry was done. Being rich was wonderful, but why Tayo joined the army? Maybe he didn't like spending money. Yujin needed to check on Tayo's room again, as monitoring his comfort was part of her duties. She first knocked on the door, then asked if he had any dirty clothes for laundry, which he could hand over since it was time to send everything to the laundry. He remained silent. Why was it so hard for him to answer? He was exactly like a ghost that had died from chatter. When the door opened, Yujin smiled sweetly because he was completely naked again, putting her in an awkward situation. The man got annoyed. Didn't she remember what he had said about her main flaw? Yujin remembered perfectly. He had said her emotions always showed on her face, so everything could be understood without extra explanation. He tried giving advice. If she acknowledged everything, why didn't she try to control herself? Yujin promised she'd try, though she didn't promise it would work immediately. Yujin kept smiling and noticed that Tayo seemed to really enjoy going shirtless. Maybe he had a secret exhibitionist streak. If she kept talking and still looked at his bare body, it seemed to him that Yujin liked looking at him. When he said it was kind of like a special uniform for employees, to stop her from peeking at others in the wrong places, she completely disagreed. She didn't like his body at all. Honestly, his body was striking, but she wasn't staring at it. She admired it the way one admires a work of art. Joking, Yujin thanked him for such a wonderful social package, since it was only hers and others could just envy this bonus to her salary. Tayo realized Yujin had a good sense of humor, but some of his jokes could affect her mood. He gathered all his dirty clothes and handed them to Yujin to take to the laundry. She thought this was truly a unique reward for her work. Not everyone got the chance to work for someone pleasant to look at and get paid for it. Yujin wondered how it would feel to touch his hands or his firm abs. His hands would probably be very hard, or maybe surprisingly soft. Yujin didn't notice how intently she was staring at him without looking away. She didn't know why the heck she was thinking about this, since it almost got her in trouble. When there was a knock on the door, Yujin thought it was the maid coming for the laundry. But when she opened it, she was surprised. She was ready to thank the maid and explain they had little dirty laundry. But when she saw the man's elegant clothes and carefully polished shoes, she looked up to see who it was. Yujin stood silently, observing the man in front of her. She didn't know what to say or why he was there. Looking up, she realized it was the chairman, and she had not expected to see him here. The chairman looked at Yujin very sternly and asked who she was and what she was doing in this room. Yujin greeted him politely. She said her name was So Yujin, and she was Jin Tayo's secretary, working in the company's planning department. She invited the chairman into Tayo's room and offered to guide him to the sitting area. When Tayo left his room and the chairman saw him, the man's expression immediately changed, and he said very harshly that he had finally appeared. Calling him a little scoundrel without even greeting him, it was clear the man was in a negative mood. Yujin couldn't believe the chairman came here of his own accord at this hour. She was curious about what was really happening. She understood her duty, offered the chairman and Tayo a cup of coffee and not interfere with their conversation. The man explained he came to the room because Tayo wasn't hurrying with the visit, and he needed his answer today. The chairman firmly demanded that Tayo immediately go abroad for training. Tayo looked nervous, and it was clear that his father's visit was unpleasant for him. He sharply replied that he wasn't going anywhere and wouldn't even think of following his father's orders. The man got very angry, pounding his fist on the table, insisting Tayo obey his order. Why did he want nothing? Neither to study abroad nor work at his company. He demanded to know what he actually wanted to do. Tayo didn't want to answer, knowing his father wouldn't like it and would criticize him again, demanding obedience. But still, the father wanted an explanation, so Tayo dared to finally say what he had long been afraid to. Tayo had been thinking about joining a private military company, but he hadn't made a final decision yet. He needed more time to consider everything carefully. The chairman was furious. Did he really want to keep wasting time on this nonsense? He needed to drop it immediately and go study abroad. After all, he was already behind his peers. Why waste any more time? The chairman urged Tayo to follow in the footsteps of his older brother and sister. He had been doing whatever he wanted for far too long, and now it was time to get serious. He also shouldn't forget the reason he'd been given so many privileges. Tayo decided it was time to get serious right now. In his mind, the conversation was over, and it was time for his father to leave. The chairman considered his son a real fool. He was refusing an opportunity for a better, calmer life, even while getting paid for coasting through school. He was almost out of the room when he glanced back and called his son a worthless brat, which surprised Yujin greatly. Yujin didn't like the chairman calling his son those names. She decided to catch up with him and explain Tayo's position so he could understand. Maybe Yujin was overstepping, but she felt it was important to tell the chairman something critical. Yujin mustered the courage to tell the chairman that her boss, Jin Tayo, had been an outstanding and responsible soldier who accomplished a lot of good deeds. She couldn't go into specifics because that information was classified, but in recent days his son had been protecting national security, risking his life. He wasn't a useless person, even though he had left the army. The president of the Joint Chiefs of Staff had personally sought him out. Didn't that make him valuable? The chairman, watching the girl speak with such admiration about his son, asked her name. She replied, "So Yujin," and the man repeated it several times to remember it. After such bravery, the chairman intended to remember Yujin for a long time. She was the fearless type who could hold a man like him and speak with confidence. Stop, Yujin thought. Could it be that the chairman noticed her and actually listened to what she dared to say? Or maybe it could all backfire, and she was really getting herself into trouble. No one had ever spoken to the chairman in the tone she had. While Yujin saw the chairman off and spoke with him, Tayo locked himself back in his room. So Yujin knocked on his door again. When he opened it, he asked rudely what she wanted this time. Yujin smiled and proudly showed her black card, suggesting they go to the restaurant for coffee, and offered to pay. Seeing the black card in her hand, Tayo said it didn't look like her personal card. Or maybe he was mistaken. But if the CEO herself was paying, he had no right to refuse. True to form, Yujin couldn't keep quiet. She had a ton of questions, but Tayo wasn't in the mood to answer any. She decided to start slowly, asking if he knew that she truly loved and respected him. Tayo looked at Yujin warily. Such a start to a conversation made him uneasy. He didn't understand what she meant. Yujin continued, saying that was why she wanted to know if he would hire her in case she ever got fired. Today, that thought crossed her mind because the chairman had noticed her courage and defiance, which supported Tayo. Tayo smiled because he knew his father well. If the chairman didn't like something, it didn't mean he had to remember it. And as for hiring her, he hadn't even considered it. If he didn't respond, Yujin understood he really wasn't going to hire her, since he saw no need. From the start, he'd thought her work pointless and unnecessary. His sister had forced her to watch over him for nothing. As they walked to the restaurant, a little boy ran up, clinging to Tayo's leg, crying loudly, calling him Dad. The boy held on tight, begging him not to leave because he was scared. Tayo tried to push him away, not understanding what was happening. Why was this boy clinging to him and calling him Dad? He looked at Yujin, expecting some reaction or help, but she was just standing there, equally confused. Yujin was shocked. She never imagined Jin Tayo had a son. But why was he hiding this? She didn't understand. When Yujin asked if the boy was really his son, Tayo got annoyed and said now was not the time for jokes. Loving and respectful as she was, Yujin had to handle the situation with the boy, or his patience would run out. Yujin understood her task immediately and decided to approach the boy, asking why he was alone and where his parents were. She guessed that if the boy ran to Tayo, thinking he was his father, he must have come to the hotel with him. But where was the boy's father? When Yujin asked about his father, the boy began crying harder. She tried to calm him, promising to help find his dad. Her patience was tested. How could a jack-of-all-trades like So Yujin struggle with a toddler? Hadn't she worked part-time at a daycare? But her charm didn't work on 3- and 4-year-olds. At that age, kids are too distracted. For her charm to work, they needed some rationality, social skills, and common sense. A child that young couldn't come alone, so it was safe to assume the parents were nearby. Or maybe she was wrong, since no one reacted to the loud crying or looked for him. All the restaurant guests continued eating peacefully. They weren't concerned because the boy was with an adult who was keeping an eye on him. Yujin suggested going to the front desk to ask the staff who the boy had come with, since they should know. The hotel manager arrived quickly, asking what happened with the young master and how he could help. Yujin assumed the boy had lost his father and wondered if anyone knew whose child he was, wandering alone in the restaurant. The manager needed time to gather info about the boy and his father, so Yujin and Tayo had to wait. The manager reported that the boy belonged to a guest staying in room 712 since last night. A colleague had gone to check the room since there was no answer to the call. That man needed to be told to come down immediately for his child, and they also needed to look at this negligent father. The staff member returned quickly, visibly flustered. Something unexpected had happened. She thought they were in trouble. She reached room 712 and saw the door open, but no one was inside. Yujin was shocked. Did the man leave his child in the room and run off? She wanted to see this irresponsible father. Didn't he know leaving a child alone was considered abuse? The staff member hesitated to jump to conclusions, but noticed the door had been forced open, not just unlocked. It seemed that while they were busy with other matters, another incident had happened in the hotel that no one noticed. An idea immediately came to mind. They needed to go to the security guard's room and check the surveillance camera footage. When the manager entered the room with Tayo and Yujin, they saw the guard sound asleep, so there was no way he had seen anything firsthand. He was annoyed too, not understanding why the manager had entered without knocking. Without explanation, the manager asked the guard if he could play the footage from the camera near room 712. The guard easily found the footage and showed it to the manager. Tayo wanted to see the recording as well, so he watched the guard's actions closely, making sure nothing important was missed. They watched the footage carefully, and suddenly Tayo told the guard to pause. The moment he needed had appeared. Tayo wanted the guard to rewind a little to see everything from the beginning. It was important to analyze every action that took place near that room. Everything was far more interesting than they had imagined. A lot of suspicious activity had happened near the room, so the details were crucial. On the first camera, 3 men were seen standing by room 712, knocking persistently on the door. When the man opened the door, these people spoke to him harshly, their expressions showing their aggression. Then, they covered the man's mouth with a cloth and tried to restrain him. It became clear that the boy's father was unconscious, and 2 of them simply dragged him down the hallway toward the exit. The door stayed open, so the little boy could walk into the hallway freely and go search for his father. Yujin watched all this unfold, stunned that such a thing could happen, and in front of so many people. As the video continued, Yujin noticed a woman appearing in front of the room's door. She thought she had seen this woman on the first floor. If she remembered her, that meant she had encountered her multiple times. From what she observed, Yujin believed the woman was looking for someone, scanning her surroundings carefully and checking everyone with her eyes. If the boy didn't recognize her, she wasn't his mother. Tayo asked the manager for the name of the man from room 712. The guest's form listed the name Han Seung-ho. Tayo thought they needed to check other cameras to trace his movements. Who were these people? Where did they take him? And even more curious, where did they get hotel staff clothing? They needed to figure all of this out. Once they decided who would handle what, everyone got to work. Tayo continued watching the footage, focusing on the woman who had come to see this man. First, they needed to find out who she was and why she was looking for Han Seung-ho. Yujin knew the boy needed to be fed to calm down. She liked the little boy. He was brave and had a good appetite. But there was no rush. Everything had to be chewed carefully. By the way, the scene in front of her was surreal. It was amazing that Jin Tayo even allowed the child to sit on his lap. Although the little boy misbehaved and threw food at him while eating, Tayo was patient and ignored it. It was strange. Kids usually prefer women over men. Yet he struggled and cried when hotel staff tried to take him from Tayo. Yujin fed the little boy for the first time, wanting him to eat a little more. She only wondered why he called Tayo Dad, since he didn't resemble him at all. Tayo had no clue either, but was eager to find out. The boy was obedient and ate well. Once fully satisfied, his mood improved and he started playing with them. But neither Yujin nor Tayo had any idea what to do next with the boy. They had no experience caring for children. Tayo was tired and had no desire to entertain the little boy. Watching Yujin play with him, it seemed to bring her great joy. To Yujin, the boy looked adorable after a good meal. All he needed was food and sleep. These carefree golden days would never return. But for her, Tayo believed they would last her whole life. In any case, they could order room service. Yujin asked what he wanted for dinner. For some reason, she personally wanted meat today. Tayo noticed that she ate it almost every day. Did she really want meat again today? Yujin considered eating meat a great pleasure. Afterward, she felt full of energy. Tayo approached, holding the boy. telling her he needed to go to sleep since he was exhausted and needed rest. Yujin was surprised when he suggested she take the boy with her. Did he expect her to sleep with him? But Yujin didn't understand why she had to take the boy. It wasn't her responsibility. Tayo thought that's exactly what she was paid for, to help him and do what he asked. Yujin didn't want him constantly reminding her of that. And if the boy woke up and went looking for his father, he would likely head straight to Tayo, believing him to be his dad. For now, it didn't matter. The boy was fast asleep. Tayo knew he'd never win a verbal argument with him. Maybe Yujin wanted him to tell her about his army salary again. She understood. She had no choice but to take the boy with her. Besides, Tayo planned to let her sleep in the bed. This was fair. He didn't expect her to sleep with the boy on the couch. Tayo wished them good night and said he'd see them in the morning. Yujin wanted him to wait. She had something to ask. She wanted to know if he would be okay and if he could sleep without her, since he had said it would be difficult. Tayo replied that he was a big boy and could manage on his own, and even if he couldn't, he'd try anyway. Yujin got into bed with the boy. She was so tired she didn't even notice falling asleep. Later, she heard him calling for his father in her sleep. At first softly, then louder. The boy's cries echoed throughout the room as he called for his dad. The boy sat on the bed beside Yujin, eyes closed, still crying. She tried to calm him, assuring him it was okay and he didn't need to scream so loudly. But the boy didn't hear her and continued shouting. And it got louder, so Yujin didn't want to wake Tayo. Realizing she couldn't calm the boy alone, she went to Tayo and dared to ask for his help. When Yujin entered Tayo's room, she noticed he was in a deep sleep. He hadn't even heard the little boy screaming at the top of his lungs right beside him. Yujin tried to wake him gently, careful not to startle him. Who knew what he might do when woken abruptly? She brought the boy into Tayo's room and suggested he take a look at his father, hoping that would calm him down. The boy immediately stopped crying and ran happily to Tayo, arms wide open. Tayo didn't understand why these problems were suddenly dumped on him. He was fine investigating criminal cases, but handling a child was beyond him. The boy quickly climbed onto the bed, hugging Tayo's arm and whispering, "Dad," before settling down to sleep. Yujin watched the boy and Tayo, realizing she liked the scene. In that moment, they looked like a happy family on vacation. Yujin made sure the boy was sound asleep and decided to head to her own bed, leaving him with Tayo. She wished him good night and hurried out of the room. Tayo couldn't just let her leave. He grabbed her hand to stop her. Yujin was supposed to stay with them since they had agreed the boy would be near her. They hadn't agreed on this. He asked where she was going. Did she really plan to let him deal with the boy while she slept peacefully? If the boy was sound asleep with Tayo, why did she need to stay nearby? He could handle it on his own. Tayo insisted she shouldn't joke like that, since she clearly didn't want to leave him alone here. Yujin didn't understand what Tayo was implying. She couldn't possibly sleep in the same bed with him. Yujin thought, could it be that Tayo wanted her to sleep in a chair by his bed this time? But that wasn't just inconvenient, it felt like pure torture. But the man didn't mean that at all. He thought there was plenty of space on his bed and they could all fit just fine. Yujin couldn't figure out what nonsense he was talking about. Maybe he was still half asleep. She decided to ask again, did he really mean that she would sleep in the same bed as him? But the man only said 2 words. Military pay. Yujin immediately agreed to get in bed, but he'd have to pay extra for overtime. Yujin lay in bed, afraid to move. She couldn't wrap her head around how she'd gotten herself into this situation. She was in the same bed with Jin Tayo in the middle of the night. Lying beside him, she could smell how nice he smelled. It seemed Yujin wasn't even trying to sleep. She wondered what kind of cologne he used. It smelled pleasant and soft to her. When he answered that he had served in the army, Yujin was surprised. Was there some rule forbidding soldiers from using cologne? If you imagined a soldier sitting on a stakeout, he'd be easily spotted by his scent. But still, he had his favorite cologne. Yujin murmured something under her breath, unsure how to ask Tayo properly. He was very sleepy, so he sharply asked what she wanted to know again. He worked hard to offer her a special benefits package. Then, a little embarrassed, Yujin asked if he was naked down there too. He noticed Yujin constantly looking at his body, but this question embarrassed him. Was she really curious about that? Tayo had grown tired of Yujin's questions, so he asked if she was planning to sleep. She quickly closed her eyes and wished him sweet dreams. Morning came, sunlight filled the room, but after yesterday's events, they were exhausted and slept in late. Yujin slept deeply, even though she knew it was time to wake up. She just couldn't open her eyes. As she woke, her eyes half closed, she couldn't immediately tell where she was, but she knew she had slept very well. What she saw made her blink several times, trying to figure out what was in front of her. At first, she thought she imagined it, but when she fully opened her eyes, she realized she had been lying very close to Tayo, her face pressed against him. She had never seen a man's bare torso up close before, so she was immediately scared and embarrassed. Could it be that they really slept in the same bed and Tayo was hugging her tightly? Yujin tried to shift away without waking him. What the hell was he doing, she thought? And why was Jin Tayo's chest right in front of her face? Why was his huge hand on her waist, holding her so tightly? It felt heavy, even pressing down on her. She thought he must always suffer from insomnia. She'd assumed he couldn't sleep at all. But apparently that wasn't true. Tayo slept very soundly, and even when Yujin tried to push him off, he didn't wake. She didn't know what she could do to get him up. In trying to wake Tayo, she forgot that the little boy was in bed with them, and it was him that she actually managed to wake up. The boy, smiling, jumped on Tayo's shoulders and started playing. It was good that nothing bothered the kid, but this day promised to be interesting. From the noise the boy made, the man immediately woke up, but he was also surprised to see Yujin in his arms. Their eyes were very close, almost touching noses. They looked at each other but said nothing. Finally, Yujin managed to say good morning, waiting for him to release her from his embrace. Tayo didn't seem in any hurry to do so. Maybe he liked waking up this way. Looking at Yujin up close, he realized she was very cute and sweet. But why hadn't he noticed before? Their morning started with them lying together in bed while enjoying the little boy's constant slaps on Tayo's face. Every time the boy slapped the man, he shouted for his dad to get up and play with him. Tayo didn't like this boy's behavior and wanted Yujin to quickly take him to another room. But the girl had other plans. She wanted to take a morning shower while the boy was in Tayo's reliable hands and behaving perfectly. She knew she had to escape quickly before Tayo realized he'd be alone with the boy for a while. So she ran out of the room quickly before he could react or stop her, reminding her about military pay. Standing by the door, she didn't know how to calm her racing heart if this continued. The boy was happily playing with a Korean express train. Yujin encouraged him, telling him the train was very fast. The boy repeated everything Yujin said with excitement. He tried to pronounce the train's name correctly. She praised him, saying he was doing great and would get a reward for his effort. Watching Yujin and the boy, Tayo concluded that she had found a partner who matched her intellect. The girl got angry. She didn't understand why he kept trying to provoke her into an argument. Did he really enjoy annoying her with his ridiculous conclusions? The hotel manager visited their room and greeted the young master politely. Tayo wanted to know if they had found anything. The manager had no news, but the cameras had recorded a suspicious guest leaving the hotel by bus. The security team had already contacted the bus station for help. They needed to find out when and where the woman got off, which would tell them where to search next. Yujin remembered something. The pen the stranger had used. It was special, and that's why she remembered it clearly. The pen immediately caught her attention. It was gold, with the number 100 at the tip, an unusual item not everyone owned. It was clear that such pens were produced in small batches for special events, so they could figure out what it had been dedicated to. But Yujin couldn't shake one question. Where had she seen a similar pen before? She remembered now, but first, she needed to clarify something. She called So-young, whom she hadn't seen in a long time, to ask about a special gold pen with the number 100 at the tip. Yujin found out that the pen was from the centennial celebration of the newspaper Korea Daily. At that time, the security guard messaged the manager that their mysterious guest had gotten off the bus near the newspaper's office. Tayo decided they needed to go there immediately. But first, someone had to take care of the little boy while they were gone. Tayo decided to leave the boy with Kim Il-deok and told Yujin that she should go with him to the newspaper office. From the little boy's expression, it was clear he didn't want to let go of Tayo or stay with a stranger. Tayo tried to explain to the boy that he had to go to work, but he could have fun with this man for a while, and Tayo would be back soon. Yujin saw how sad the boy became, and she felt really sorry for him. He had been through a lot over the past few days, events that had shaken him deeply, but she noticed a change in Tayo. He spoke gently to the boy and even showed a little care for him. Tayo and Yujin left, while the manager stayed in the room with the boy. It seemed like he had no idea what to do, since he didn't have children of his own. The manager noticed Yujin and Tayo walking away, smiling as they went to do their work. Even though Yujin considered Tayo a strict father, he seemed different today. Yujin kept smiling. Today had been full of rare, delightful moments, and she wanted more. Could it be that the rare enjoyment from this morning wasn't enough, even though she had clung tightly to him? The manager noticed that his young master looked much happier today than he had a few days ago. He realized this girl had a strong, positive effect on him. He was pleased that Tayo had a girl like Yujin by his side. She was bringing him back to real civilian life, something he had grown out of over the years. Yujin and Tayo were already leaving the hotel. The girl thought that Mr. Jin would make a really good father someday, even though he denied it. The man considered Yujin's sarcasm flawless, but she was serious. There wasn't a trace of cynicism in her words. Although she noticed it annoyed him, he let the little boy continue calling him dad, and even act as if it were real. He behaved that way because he didn't want things to get even more frustrating. If the boy realized he wasn't his real father, he'd cry constantly. In any case, not everyone could do something like that. Yujin truly believed he would be the best father in the world for this little boy. She got so caught up in the conversation that she didn't even notice she was in danger. Tayo grabbed her hand and pulled her toward him very quickly, saving her life. The girl was terrified. She hadn't seen the danger behind her, and Tayo's action was simply an attempt to help. In rescuing Yujin, the man held her tightly, and fortunately, she ended up only slightly shaken. Yujin couldn't comprehend what had just happened. For the first time, she felt real fear, but in Tayo's arms, she felt safe. Looking back, the girl noticed a car speeding past her. It seemed like she'd seen something like this before. The car was moving at a crazy speed, which was forbidden in that area, and it was strange. Expensive cars don't usually almost take your life. Yujin yelled after the car, calling the driver an idiot and wondering why someone would speed through a crowded place. She thought Mr. Jin was a unique man. Someone almost died near him, and he didn't even blink. That was exactly what happened when the car nearly hit the girl. But now it was different. Tayo reacted in time and saved her. He asked Yujin if she was okay, even though he'd never done something like that before. Could it be that some humanity and compassion were awakening in him? She felt really happy sensing his care. It meant that somewhere deep inside, he was still a kind and considerate person. So without any jokes or sarcastic comments, Yujin sincerely thanked Tayo, since he had truly saved her from danger. They didn't notice how long they'd been standing in each other's arms in the middle of the street, not even trying to hide that they enjoyed it. But they had errands to run, so Tayo let go of the girl and gestured in the direction they needed to go. He walked ahead and Yujin stood still, unable to believe that this man was changing for the better, thanks to her. Looking at Tayo, Yujin realized she liked him, but she desperately tried to push those thoughts away. This man wasn't meant for her. He would never notice a girl like her. He only saw her as an assistant. Mr. Jin just knew that for some matters, he couldn't manage without her help. She walked behind Tayo, trying to make sense of some questions in her head, but she couldn't because this man was still a mystery to her. Finally, they reached the newspaper office where the mysterious woman they were looking for worked. To get inside, they needed an employee card. Yujin didn't know what to do since they didn't even know her name. They thought about barging in, but they were sure the guards would kick them out immediately. Plus, they might get on the newspaper's radar. Tayo thought for a moment and then asked the girl if she had ever worked as a security guard. She had never done that before, but she had talked closely with the old security guard at their company's building. While they were thinking it over, they realized they didn't need to enter the building anymore, so one problem was already solved. They noticed the woman they were looking for leaving through the gate. They remembered her very well and couldn't be mistaken. It was indeed the same woman who had visited the boy's father. They needed to find out why she came and where the man had gone. They decided not to waste time and approached her immediately, insisting she tell them everything and tell the truth. Her badge said her name was Nam Eun-soo. She looked tense, not understanding what was happening. Tayo politely addressed her by name and immediately reassured her that she didn't need to worry. They just wanted to ask a few questions. Before answering, the woman wanted to know who they were and how they knew her. She had never seen them in her life before. When Tayo mentioned the boy's father and asked about her connection to Han Sung-ho, her expression changed instantly. Nam Eun-soo insisted they explain who they were, but Yujin said they just needed to ask a few questions regarding Han Sung-ho's kidnapping. The woman guessed they might be police, but they immediately denied it, explaining they were conducting a personal investigation. In that case, she had nothing to tell them and quickly decided to say goodbye and go about her business. Yujin didn't want to miss the chance to tell the woman that Han Sung-ho had left a child at the hotel, who missed his father terribly. When Han Sung-ho was kidnapped, the boy had been in the room. Now he was with them, but he really wanted to see his father, so they decided to find him without police help. From Nam Yoon-soo's expression, it was clear she had some information, but wasn't sure if she could share it. Then she gathered courage and said she couldn't talk there. They needed to find a quieter place where no one could see or hear them. Once they found a quiet spot, she acted more freely. Nam Eun-soo asked if they had ever heard of the Great Empire. Yujin had no idea what she was talking about, but Tayo probably guessed. It was indeed a massive organization. A huge part of the country's money flowed there. As the name suggested, it was an empire, and the person running it was known as the Shadow Emperor. His name was Choi Taekwang. Society knew nothing about him, but among his people, he was powerful and ran nearly everything personally. He was an unusual club owner. In Seoul alone, he owned 6 clubs and numerous bars. Rumor had it the emperor made hundreds of millions a day. Tayo knew it was impossible to make hundreds of millions legally. And he was right. At first glance, the club seemed normal, but in reality, all kinds of crimes thrived there. The Shadow Emperor Choi Taekwang. He really was a true emperor. The prosecutors were his butlers. The police were his loyal guards protecting his home, and even the press, despite all the crimes, never reported a single thing. Yujin asked why she had dared to conduct a secret journalistic investigation. The woman replied that someone had to try to stop it. Being afraid of this criminal was beneath her dignity. But Yujin wanted to know what the connection was between the Imperial Club and this man, Han Seung-ho, since it was clear they weren't friends. Nam Eun-soo explained that she had met Mr. Han while gathering secret material for her article. He said he had evidence of some of the emperor's crimes, as well as a list of corrupt prosecutors and police officers, complete with video proof of their misconduct. Mr. Han Sung-ho was a true knight protecting the emperor and a loyal assistant. At first, it seemed suspicious that he offered to hand over all the evidence to her, so she looked into him a bit. Han Sung-ho had been seeing the emperor's mistress for a long time, and they loved each other. They probably dreamed of living a normal life after escaping the empire, but they couldn't break free. Nam Eun-soo still didn't know exactly what had happened there. After everything, the mistress couldn't take it anymore and committed suicide, leaving Han Seung-ho to suffer alone. Yujin couldn't even imagine that such horrors were happening right around them, and they had no idea that dangerous criminals were operating nearby. Losing the love of his life hit him harder than he could have imagined, and that's when Han Sung-ho took matters into his own hands. He was supposed to give her some information at the hotel, but when she approached his room, the door was broken and no one was inside. She didn't know the little boy was still in the room. Perhaps the journalist knew where Mr. Han Seung-ho was and where he was being held. According to the Empire's rules, dealing with traitors was brutally harsh. The news would never report it, and no traces would be left behind. If he was still alive, he was somewhere locked up, but not too far from the hotel. There was only one possible place. It had to be the impenetrable Imperial Castle. The Empire was off limits to ordinary people. Only those whom the Emperor truly trusted, who had served him faithfully for many years, could enter. Tayo and Yujin returned to the hotel. Their trip had been successful. They had gathered enough information to start searching for Han Sung-ho. As soon as they entered the room, the little boy ran to Tayo, grabbing his leg and joyfully greeting his surrogate father. The manager welcomed the young master back and handed the boy over to them, as he had missed him terribly. He wanted to know how their meeting with the journalist went and whether they had managed to get any useful information. Han Sung-ho had chosen their hotel as the best in the country, probably thinking it would keep him safe from prying eyes and ears. Tayo barely restrained his anger, feeling it was shameful that this man had been kidnapped right there in broad daylight. He believed that as the hotel's owner, he was obliged to find and rescue his guest. They needed to track down every employee who had worked yesterday, both day and night shifts. The rats inside were worse than those outside. The manager gladly agreed to follow Tayo's orders, fully supporting his decision and ready to help in any way. Once the manager left their room, Tayo took some time to think everything through and plan his next moves. Yujin wanted to know what the man intended to do, but she never got an answer. Tayo couldn't explain yet. He didn't know what he needed for a successful rescue, though he knew the danger was immense. They noticed someone knocking at the door again, though they weren't expecting any guests. When the door opened, Yujin saw a young man entering, but she had no idea who he was. From the way Tayo looked at him, Yujin realized they knew each other, though it was clear Mr. Jin was not pleased to see him. The young man smiled genuinely, eager to see Mr. Hyungnim again. That's why he had come without warning. As soon as the boy saw the guest, he ran over to him, calling him his father. Tayo saw the boy clinging to the young man's leg and happily hugging him. He was genuinely offended, calling the boy a traitor. Tayo addressed Kang Sang-yoon, asking why he was here again. He was sure the young man knew very well that he wasn't welcome. But the young man joked, pointing at the boy. Didn't Tayo see how happy the child was to see him? Tayo, speaking to Sergeant Kang Sang-yoon, who listened closely, ordered him to disappear from his sight immediately. The sergeant's smile vanished. He didn't want to upset his friend, but it was useless. Yujin didn't understand why Tayo treated this young man so harshly, but she tried to intervene in their conversation. She smiled, not wanting Tayo to be so angry. They should at least have lunch together if everyone was gathered there. Tayo looked at Yujin seriously, trying to convey that it wasn't right for her to interfere in a conversation between adult men. Perhaps she wanted to side with the stranger instead of him, which only made things worse. The thing he hated most in life was double-dealing and traitors who quickly betrayed their loved ones for personal gain. Yujin was upset. She couldn't imagine he had thought that about her. She asked what he meant by accusing her like that. She had always been the perfect example of loyalty. In high school, she had even been given the nickname So Chun-hyang, in honor of the main character of the story about unwavering loyalty to her beloved. After a while, the boy realized he was holding the wrong man's leg. Looking at Tayo, he ran to him and grabbed his leg again, calling him father. Yujin found it amusing, and so did the sergeant. The boy seemed genuinely loyal. Maybe his nickname was also Chunhyang. The girl laughed, enjoying the boy's behavior, and both she and the sergeant laughed out loud. Only Tayo wasn't amused. He still insisted that the sergeant leave the room immediately and never appear unannounced again. But then he had an idea he wanted to try, and the sergeant could help him with it. Tayo asked the sergeant how many discharged soldiers he had been in contact with. Kang Sang-yoon had no idea what he was planning. But if he asked, the sergeant would gladly help. He asked how many ex-military men Tayo needed. The man thought for a moment, then firmly said he needed 4 close combat specialists. The sergeant was surprised. Why did he need such fighters? Maybe he needed masters? Something very interesting was clearly brewing. Tayo wasn't joking. He sharply explained that a hostage rescue was planned. If there were only 5 fighters, how many enemies would they face? Mr. Jin couldn't say for sure, but likely there would be many. Yujin was terrified. Just 5 fighters facing the Emperor's highly trained guards was sheer madness. The sergeant asked only one question. When did Mr. Jin need the fighters? Tayo said tomorrow at 6 p.m. they'd need to prepare their own weapons. Yujin wasn't amused at all. Hearing they'd be going to rescue a hostage with weapons meant there would likely be casualties. Night fell again. All plans for tomorrow were set, so it was time to sleep and rest. Once again, Yujin ended up in Tayo's bed. She felt a bit embarrassed. What if his chest was in her face again, like this morning? Thinking back, she didn't understand why she had been so scared. Nothing bad had happened, and he held her very tightly. Yujin tried to close her eyes and finally sleep, but something wouldn't let her. Why was she tormented by useless thoughts when she should already be asleep? Understanding this, she covered her face with the blanket, avoiding looking at Tayo. She was also unsettled by the fact that Tayo planned to take only 5 fighters, with no idea how many enemies there would be. Yujin, without looking at Tayo, realized he couldn't sleep either, so she decided to talk to him about wanting to go with him. They could go to the Empire together tomorrow, but Tayo thought there was absolutely nothing for her to do there. The girl didn't think that way because he was always telling her that she should do something useful. Even without thinking about the consequences, there could be small situations where she could be helpful. For example, Yujin could drive the car. Jin Tayo didn't want Yujin by his side because he thought she would just get in the way and create extra worry. It wouldn't cost him anything to have her around. He just needed to let her be his personal driver. She could drive them and wait for their return from a distance. Tayo didn't even know how to respond. It was extremely risky, and the operation didn't need a woman's presence because participating in such missions was very dangerous. Not knowing Tayo well, she hadn't noticed before that he ever worried about anyone. It seemed he didn't care about the fate of others who willingly put themselves in danger. The young man wasn't good with words, so he couldn't fully express the feelings he had at that moment. He wanted to understand why Yujin always wanted to accompany him. Was she doing it just to earn a reward for her work? But sometimes he thought she might care about his safety. Still, he couldn't figure out what about him Yujin could like, since he always treated her roughly, without any emotion. He dared to touch her hair, hoping she wouldn't pull away. He had wanted to do it for a long time, but lacked the courage, always dismissing the thought. Would she always support him in situations that were extremely dangerous and try to help whenever needed? From her reactions, it was clear she liked his touch, and she didn't even try to stop him. No matter how dangerous the situation, Yujin agreed to support him. She did it even when his father insisted on his studies. She wasn't afraid and protected him, even at the risk of losing her job. Yujin liked it when Tayo touched her lips. It was so gentle that she held her breath and savored the moment. She surrendered to his embrace, closed her eyes, and decided to accept something she had previously refused outright. Tayo held Yujin gently and felt calm and content being near her. She was the first woman he genuinely enjoyed being around, someone who didn't judge his actions or demand anything impossible from him. Finally, the man dared to kiss Yujin. This kiss was their first step in confirming their feelings for each other. He wanted to hold Yujin. She was so gentle and beautiful. He didn't want to admit right away that he liked her instantly because he didn't want any relationships. But now he understood what he had been denying himself. It was pure joy to have someone to hold and kiss by your side. As Tayo kissed Yujin and gently bit her lips, she felt pleasure, not even imagining it could feel this good. They got so caught up in each other that for a while they even forgot the little kid sleeping in the bed with them, who could wake up any minute. They didn't want to stop at all because they both enjoyed it. Finally, they could forget their problems and relax both physically and emotionally. As one could expect, the kid woke up and cried loudly, clinging to Tayo. The boy cried nonstop, as if he had a bad dream and got really scared, demanding protection from his new father. Tayo tried to calm the boy, asking him not to cry since his father was right there and hadn't gone anywhere. Yujin smiled sweetly, finding once again confirmation that Tayo would make a very good father for his child. The boy couldn't calm down, so Tao decided he needed Eugene's help, but she thought he could handle it on his own. With this little boy around, Tayo began to change. He became more attentive, tried to understand others, and took part in caring for the child. Tayo decided that he must bring back Han Seung-ho no matter the cost and return the boy to him. Even a single interaction with this little kid was more than enough for him. It couldn't interfere with his personal life because he wasn't ready for that. Yujin believed Seung-ho could handle everything because he always managed complex situations that seemed hopeless. A new day arrived, but it was very challenging for them. There were many tasks planned, and to complete them, they had to put themselves in danger. The sergeant kept his promise and brought fighters who would help rescue the hostage. Calling Yujin his daughter-in-law, he began introducing the men from the right side, one by one. The first guy, Kim Min-ji, was still young but skilled. He had completed many successful operations. Next was Jo Tae-shik. He had a lot of experience but was stubborn with commanders, always having his own opinion. Third was Woo Sung-hoon. At first glance, he didn't look like a fighter, but he had a strong inner core, and his endurance was top level. The sergeant smiled, pointing to himself, telling Yujin she already knew him. She didn't understand why he kept calling her his daughter-in-law. Tayo didn't want to waste time, so he suggested finishing the introductions and thanked the guys for daring to come. The guys didn't see anything special. They were always happy to help a colleague. When Tayo tried to explain the mission to the fighters, rescuing the boy's father, the kid watched the men closely and called each one father. To keep the boy from hearing sensitive info, Tayo tried covering his ears. He said it was uncertain whether the hostage was alive, but the operation would proceed assuming he was. Jo Tae-shik was the oldest and most responsible. The first thing he wanted to know was the area where the hostage was held. Tayo didn't go into details, just said he had info that the hostage was kept at the Empire Club. Then he explained the plan for infiltrating the club, which had a heavy security presence. Woo Sung-hoon understood which club Tayo meant, so he realized the complexity of the mission. It would be tough to get past security because everyone was carefully checked. It was a 6-story building with 1 basement and 5 above-ground floors. They might have to check every floor depending on the situation. They had to minimize conflicts. Once they had the hostage, they needed to leave the building immediately and get as far away as possible. The journalist also came by, promising to bring something useful before the operation. She held a blueprint of the Empire building, which could greatly help them get inside unnoticed. Nam Eunsu didn't ask what would happen. Although she struggled to contain her professional curiosity, she knew this was extremely important. She had prepared the plan while working undercover. She couldn't be 100% sure of its accuracy since there were many restricted areas. Kang Sang-hyun thought it would be much faster if they split into two teams, one going west, the other east. They could sweep the building from both sides and meet in the center. If they found the hostage, they had to evacuate him immediately. Yoon-soo warned the fighters to be careful because the basement had an octagon, a near-real fight ring. It was where men fought almost to the death to earn the title of Honorary Imperial Knight. Fighters battled until the very end, willing to die for huge prize money awarded to the winner. Spectators lost their minds watching. If a fighter pleased Choi Tae-kwang, he would become his knight, guarding him 24/7, so avoid encounters when possible. They were infamous for brutality and madness. When the journalist mentioned that the emperor had several such knights, Yoo-jin got scared. There was no way 5 fighters could handle such a large number of professional guards. The guards were very ruthless, so expecting mercy was pointless. Looking at the fighters, Yoo-jin realized they weren't worried at all after hearing the journalist. They even smiled, as if they were just about to play a simple game. One of them looked very impatient, already pulling a knife from his pocket, ready to head to the Empire Club immediately. The sergeant was calm, as if he went on similar missions almost daily, seeing nothing unusual in this case. Tayo insisted that everyone follow the plan exactly. He wouldn't tolerate any deviations. If anyone objected, he asked them to speak up immediately. Yoo-jin had been asking Tayo for a long time to let her be his driver and take part in the special operation. And finally he agreed, but on the condition that she wouldn't leave the car. The girl was a little tense, worried about how the hostage rescue would go, but when she looked at the fighters, they were completely calm. They prepared carefully, making sure they didn't forget anything. They went over their plan a few more times to avoid any unexpected surprises. They understood that the outcome could be positive, but anything could happen, and a lot of blood could be spilled. There could be as much blood as needed, but everyone had to stay alive. After hearing this, Yoo-jin became even more anxious. The Empire building. It was time to start the special operation, as this was the period when there were few people around. It was Yoo-jin's job to drive quickly to the entrance and then leave, so their car wouldn't stay under camera surveillance for long. But Yoo-jin couldn't let Tayo go without telling him something important, something he should remember in case anything happened to him. Addressing him very formally, Mr. Jin, she first wanted to tell him to be extremely careful and, most importantly, that she would be waiting for his return. Even if Mr. Han couldn't be saved, Tayo still had to take care of himself and remember that she would be waiting for him. Tayo didn't expect such instructions from Yoo-jin, but he promised to return in 10 minutes. If they were gone too long, Yoo-jin had to leave immediately. He had to go, and Yoo-jin understood perfectly, but she didn't want to let him go, knowing how dangerous it was inside. Knowing everything about the Emperor and his guards, she realized rescuing the hostage would be very difficult, still believing that 5 people were too few. The Octagon. They had to avoid contact if possible. They were notorious for cruelty and madness. Thinking of the journalist's words, Yoo-jin began to get nervous again, hoping these guys would return safe and unharmed. The start went well, and the fighters managed to enter the building unnoticed. They moved quietly, trying not to make any noise. The guys stopped when they heard movements coming from the elevator. They paused to neutralize whoever came out. Everything had to be done quietly since other guards could hear and rush to the suspicious sounds. The elevator doors opened and a man came out. He looked like the Emperor's chief guard. He didn't even have time to realize what was happening before one of the fighters hit him on the head, knocking him unconscious to the floor. They knew they had only 10 minutes. Tayo and Sergeant Kang decided to go west, while the arrests went east. They had to block all escape routes. All floors were blocked, so they had to adjust the plan and start searching for the hostage using the stairs. The fighters moved, opening every door they could access. No matter the cost, they had to find the hostage quickly. Opening the door to one room, they found it empty. But seconds later, they heard footsteps. Someone was coming down the corridor straight toward them. By the voice, it was clear the man was mumbling to himself. He said he had sent someone for food and wondered why it took so long. He was furious that this scoundrel was mocking him again and not following orders in time. He better not cross paths with this jerk, or the punishment would match the offense. the man didn't notice one of the fighters behind him, ready for a decisive strike. A few seconds of inattention, and the man was on the floor. The fighter managed to do it quietly, as planned. Then they decided to go to the room the guard had come from. Everyone in the Empire started panicking. It was unclear why the guards hadn't returned so long. Something must be happening, and they had no idea. They couldn't figure it out, but trouble was at their doorstep. When the door opened, they saw strangers in dark clothes and immediately realized intruders were in the building. Tayo and Kang Sang-yun, entering the room, noticed many people inside. They wondered who they were and how they got in unnoticed. Tayo realized he had been a bit hasty, and the sergeant agreed completely. These people hated outsiders, so they rushed at them with bats, threatening to kill them. A guard lunged at the sergeant to strike, but the soldier skillfully avoided the bat hitting his head. His reflexes saved him. The guards realized they were dealing with professional soldiers who had all the combat skills. When one hesitated slightly, the sergeant struck him on the head immediately. Seconds later, the bat was in the sergeant's hands, and he was pleased it came to him without a fight. The guards were already irritated enough and ready to kill the strangers immediately. Kang Sang-hyun landed a few more strikes, but another guard resisted, even trying to fight back. Although he struggled, the sergeant kept striking to neutralize him quickly. Time was running out. The guard's partner ran to help, holding a knife. Calling Kang Sang-hyun a freak, he tried to attack from behind. The sergeant didn't see him, so he was in danger. When Tayo noticed the guard approaching his soldier, he immediately stepped in to protect him. The guard's knife whistled right in front of Tayo's face. A little closer, and he would have been hit. Tayo barely dodged, but he got so angry that he immediately struck the scoundrel. One careless move made an incredible noise in the Empire building, drawing guards to the scene one by one. They tried to take out Tayo and his fighters, but kept failing. They realized they were dealing with skilled professionals and used every available tool. A guard swung a bat at Tayo, not expecting what would happen. He thought he had hit him, but Tayo didn't react at all. He stood firm while the bat shattered into pieces, like it was a toy. The guard thought Tayo was insane, impervious to pain, and was a little shaken realizing defeating him would be difficult. Tayo didn't waste time and kicked the largest guard in the chest, knocking him down. Sang-hyun was impressed with Hyung's skill. He expected nothing less. He immediately thanked him for covering and saving his life. They tried to survey the room, but something felt off, though they couldn't figure out what. The room seemed suspicious, so they carefully inspected every crack to find clues to help locate the hostage. Minutes later, they found a hidden door. Opening it, they discovered the hostage. They had found him. The man was lying on the floor, clearly tortured with blood all around him. The target was found, so they had to prepare for retreat, slipping out without engaging other guards. But they were slightly delayed hearing footsteps. It was clear multiple people were there. They discussed the noise spreading across the floor in disbelief. It seemed like they'd have to stay a while in this establishment. The man saw Tayo and his fighters and smiled, saying he didn't expect a few rats to run into his proper establishment. Tayo immediately recognized the man in the elegant suit. If he hadn't seen him in photos, he couldn't have imagined the scoundrel looked like this. It was the emperor of the entire empire, Choi Taekwang. He was curious to find out who sent them and what they wanted. The emperor couldn't believe his eyes, struggling to understand what was happening right under his nose and that uninvited guests had entered his domain. Calling the guys brazen freaks who had stormed his territory and refused to answer the emperor's questions, he deemed it unacceptable in his world, demanding their immediate elimination. Understanding the gravity of the situation, the guys stayed confident, but they were thinking about how to save the hostage and get him out safely. Without hesitation, the emperor ordered those scoundrels taken out immediately. The guards sprang into action at once. Looking at the number of guards, the guys realized this fight wouldn't be easy, but they had to hold their ground and fight to the last. With so many well-trained guards, the emperor was confident they could easily handle two worthless guys. The guards fell one by one. The guys fought skillfully, supporting each other, and managed to keep up. They struck effectively, but the guards kept coming. Their military training helped. They had iron endurance. Behind Tayo appeared a guard trying to hit him with a bat, but Tayo noticed in time, and the strike failed. He immediately got a decisive counterstrike. The guard was on the floor, barely breathing. They couldn't believe it, but it seemed they had handled all the guards called by the emperor. The emperor watched closely. He realized these guys were professionals. They had held out against octagon fighters for so long, but he decided it was time to end it. Tayo disagreed. knowing it would take more effort to finish them, and the Emperor's guards were running low. The Emperor acknowledged the fighters' professionalism, but pointed out that there were only 2 of them. He laughed, thinking it absurd to show up at his empire and try to withstand his massive guard force. But within seconds, his confidence vanished. His entire guard was unconscious on the floor. Some of his aides insisted there were only 2 fighters, but it turned out there were many more. Seeing additional fighters arriving, the Emperor flew into a rage and yelled at the remaining guards to eliminate everyone immediately. Kill these freaks instantly and make them suffer before death. That was the Emperor's furious wish. The guards barely had time to react before the Emperor himself was on the floor. One fighter decided to take care of the remaining guards, and Tayo had no objections. But it had to be done quickly. The fighter understood perfectly, and within seconds, all the guards were neutralized. The priority now was to get the target and leave the building fast. But there was a problem. The doors were locked and no key could be found. It seemed backup had already reached the doors, so they were locked to prevent the fighters from leaving. If they couldn't exit through the doors, they would have to prepare an escape through the window. While guards threatened them from behind the doors, Tayo found a huge rope, opened a window, and lowered it down. Once everything was ready, the fighters suggested that Senior Sergeant Jin go first. Tayo disagreed, insisting he came first and would leave last. The argument ended there. It was his final word. The commander's role had to be respected, so all talk ended, and the window escape operation began. When the fighters descended, the hardest part was holding the unconscious hostage and getting him safely to the ground. Once the hostage was on the ground and Tayo confirmed he was safe, he ordered the guys to retreat quickly. Tayo stayed in the room, seemingly not even trying to go down. He sat on the windowsill when he realized the guards had opened the door and were entering the room. 586. To save his fighters, Tayo quickly cut the rope with his knife, leaving him alone in the room with the Emperor's guards. To save his fighters, Tayo quickly cut the rope with his knife, leaving him alone in the room with the Emperor's guards. The guys didn't understand why their commander cut the rope instead of coming down to them. They realized he wanted to protect them, using himself as bait for the guards. By delaying them, he allowed the fighters to move the hostage away from the Emperor's building. The guards knew Tayo could jump out the window at any moment, so they ran to grab him. Losing him would be fatal. They all lunged at Tayo, thinking he was clever enough not to jump from the 3rd floor. But they were wrong. Jin Tayo was fearless and would do anything if it meant a chance to survive. The guards watched in shock as this insane warrior jumped from the 3rd floor. The fighters thought he was crazy too. Jin Tayo was a special warrior, so landing from the 3rd floor was easy. He was unharmed. Surely the fighters hadn't forgotten that Senior Sergeant Jin Tayo was a living weapon, famous as the battlefield ghost. They rushed to the car because they needed to get the hostage to a safe place as quickly as possible. Choi Taekwang's guards tried to catch up with them, cursing, but the soldiers deftly jumped into the car, which immediately screeched and sped off. The soldiers happily congratulated each other on the successful completion of their mission. They missed adventure because civilian life was too boring for them. Jin Tayo breathed a sigh of relief and said that the mission had taken 12 minutes and 27 seconds. Yujin gripped the steering wheel and said excitedly that he had told her he would be back in 10 minutes, but 12 minutes and 27 seconds had passed. For her, those few minutes felt like an eternity. Her eyes showed genuine concern. She was worried, but she believed that Tayo would return to her, so she was prepared to wait as long as necessary, even if it meant disobeying his orders. A sincere smile appeared on the man's face, and this confused the girl again. Lately, Tayo had been acting too unusually and sweetly. He bumped his fist against hers and praised her, saying she had done a great job. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this story and what manhwa you'd like to see next. See you in the next installment.